A bit of light rain over the Western Isles at times, but otherwise it's dry. A bit more cloud spilling into Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly into the west, but hazy sunshine across eastern Scotland and certainly for most of England and Wales. It's dry, it's bright. It's not particularly warm, but temperatures are close to average, 7 to 9 Celsius after what was a fairly frosty start to the day. We will see a little bit more rain coming in this evening into the northwest. Weather for what we saw earlier, just edging its way down towards the Highlands by the time we get towards midnight. Further south, clear and cold, frosty, and there'll be a bit more fog around, I suspect, tonight compared to last night across parts of South Wales, the South Midlands and southern England. -2, -3, that's towns and cities, whereas further north with more cloud, more breeze, it won't be as frosty here. Will be a little bit grey and damp across the west of Northern Ireland and the Highlands first thing on Tuesday morning. That band of thicker cloud, the odd spot of drizzle trying to push southwards. For England and Wales, we'll have that fog. Could take a while to clear, certainly likely to stick around through the rush hour, but then it's a dry, fine and sunny day. Perhaps a little cloudier over northern England and thicker cloud across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland from what was that weather front, but it's really fizzling out as it pushes southwards. Maybe the odd spot of drizzle here and there during Tuesday evening across southwest Scotland. Again, we'll see that frost coming back across the south as we head into Wednesday morning. The rest of the week, largely dry, but turning a little cloudier and slowly turning a little milder as well.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 12 noon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this hour. The biggest strike in NHS history underway, with ambulance crews now joining nurses on the picket lines. The government accusing unions of putting lives at risk, but one union leader is hit back by saying ministers are choosing to punish nurses. We'll have the latest and hear from the head of the Welsh ambulance service, where a deal has been struck over pay. Specialist diving teams now joining the search for the missing dog walker Nicola Bulley. They've been called in by her family after they questioned the direction of the police investigation. We'll get the latest from our reporter at the scene. In the last half hour, Turkey hit by a second huge earthquake, hitting rescue efforts as workers try to recover people from collapsed buildings. The death toll now in the thousands and is expected to rise significantly further. We'll ask a geoscientist if further aftershocks are expected. And don't forget to email your thoughts on all the stories we're covering today, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, an update on all the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 12. The death toll from a devastating earthquake that hit Turkey earlier today has risen to more than 1,300, with that figure expected to rise. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. As rescue teams continue to frantically search through the rubble for survivors, a second powerful quake struck the same area, causing further damage. Turkish President Erdogan described the quake as the worst disaster to hit Turkey since a similar one struck in December 1939.
We do not know how far the number of dead and injured will rise, as debris removal works continue in many buildings in the quake zone. Our hope is that we will recover from this disaster with the least loss of life. We have received several calls for international aid to our country. Offer of assistance from 45 countries, including NATO and the European Union, have reached us.
Thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing are beginning a 2-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Minister Maria Caulfield told GB News it's not affordable to meet the union's demands.
We followed an independent process with a pay review body that the union signed up to, and we're very happy with the settlement last year. And it's difficult for us now. If we are to give a pay award to nurses, we'll have to look at teachers, we'll have to look at ambulance drivers. We just can't afford inflation-busting pay rises that the unions are currently demanding.
General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, says the government are punishing nurses.
Nurses deserve and need a decent pay rise. That will boost the economy, not damage the economy, because nurses spend in their local communities. So every NHS worker, including our nurses, deserve a decent pay rise. And here we are in a situation today where this government has chosen to punish the nurses of England instead of getting round a table and talking to me about pay in the same way as they've done in Wales and in Scotland.
Today marks the 16th and final strike day for teachers in Scotland who walked out in a dispute over pay. But more walkouts are on the horizon as there's been no agreement between the teaching unions and Holyrood. The unions are demanding a 10% rise for their members, but the Scottish Government has only offered a 5% increase. Former Met police officer David Carrick is due to be sentenced at Southwark Crown Court today. Carrick admitted to 24 counts of rape, as well as charges of sexual assault, controlling and coercive behaviour and false imprisonment. He's accused of carrying out the attacks on a dozen women over an 18-year period while serving as a police officer. The 48-year-old is due to be sentenced over the course of 2 days. A private underwater rescue company has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company SGI have been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there's still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her 2 children to school. The head of Epsom College has been found dead alongside her husband and her 7-year-old daughter. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating, but say they're confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. The Princess of Wales has urged school children to keep talking about their feelings as she marked the start of Children's Mental Health Week. Kate joined pupils in London's East End in raising the importance of being open with feelings. It's after she launched her Shaping Us campaign last week, which raises the profile of the early years development of children. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So the biggest strike in the history of the NHS, with nurses' unions warning that the industrial unrest in the health service will continue for, as they say, as long as it takes. Today's 12-hour stoppage in England and some parts of Wales exacerbated by ambulance crews also walking out, although emergency cover is still being provided. But the government has accused the ambulance unions of not providing sufficient detail of their emergency cover. That's been angrily denied by Unite and the GMB. Our national reporter Ellie Costello has the latest.
Enough is enough! It's the first time that nurses and ambulance staff have joined the picket line together. It's poised to be the biggest strike in NHS history. So, who's involved? While continuing its series of strikes, the Royal College of Nursing expects more than 30,000 nurses to walk out across 73 NHS trusts in England. Previous action involved up to 55 trusts. The GMB union believes more than 10,000 ambulance workers will also take part in strikes across 7 regions in England and Wales. And the Unite union is preparing for around 2,600 of its members to walk off the job in 4 English regions and in Wales. All 3 unions are demanding better pay and conditions. They blame the government for underfunding the NHS and its staff for years.
And I've never been more concerned about patient safety, and nor have my colleagues. Patients are not getting the treatment they deserve, and we're not able to deliver the care that we've signed up to give them. All around, all we want is a better deal, not for just the staff, but for the patients. They deserve so much better.
It just can't continue. It's too heartbreaking. It's a job that I love, but I need to pay my bills, and we need to keep people in the profession. Nursing students don't want to be nurses. Experienced nurses are leaving. There will be no one left. And I don't blame them, but I can't imagine doing anything else.
The strike will cause disruption. Thousands of operations and appointments face being cancelled, and a bank holiday-style service is expected in many areas. 62-year-old Gary Coogan has been waiting for triple bypass surgery for nearly 2 years.
It feels like all the institutions you've paid into, when it comes around to you needing them, they let you down for their own reasons, but I'm not the one that's put any of these institutions into these situations.
When do we get it? Now! How do we get it? Strike! The Royal College of Nursing has agreed to staff chemotherapy centres, emergency cancer services, dialysis, critical care units, neonatal and paediatric intensive care. The Department for Health and Social Care says that by accepting the independent pay review body recommendations, we have given over 1 million NHS workers a pay rise of at least £1,400 this year. Talks between the government and the unions are continuing, but union bosses warn there'll be more action unless a serious offer on pay is made. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Well, as we're reporting, the ambulance crews joining the nurses this time round. Let's go down to Castleford Ambulance Station and join our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley, who's there on the picket line. And Anna, we had Grant Shapps, the government minister, accusing the unions of not providing sufficient detail of where the emergency cover would be. What's been the reaction there of those on the picket line?
Good afternoon. Yes, that's something that has been completely refuted here, Mark. They said they did give sufficient warning to the government in case the army needed to be put in place, and they gave the trust a lot of forewarning. So speaking to people here on the picket line, they don't know where that line has come from. And of course, it's about pay, the rising costs of living, but it's also about conditions. I'm joined now by Joe Broadbent. He's a paramedic here at Castleford Ambulance Station. It is the conditions as much as anything. Of course, a pay rise would help, wouldn't it? But it's sort of the state of the NHS at the moment.
Absolutely. The NHS is in turmoil, it's in crisis, and it goes back as far as the social care as well. There's a backlog there. If people can't move out of the hospital into social care, then it's a knock-on effect right through to A&E and the ambulances that are waiting on the corridors. Whilst we're there, they're calling out for Cat 1s. We can't respond to them at all. And it's frustrating and demoralising. But unless the government are going to sit down and sit with us, have a talk, we're not going to get nowhere.
So you say it's frustrating, it's demoralising. So you're sat there with a patient in your ambulance when you could be moving on to another job, but there's not the capacity in the hospital.
Absolutely. Like I said, the capacity is stretched as it is. We can't move on. We can't go out and do the job that we want to be here to do. Ultimately, people join this job for caring. They want to look after people. But while we're sat on corridors, what can we do?
And what would you say public perception's been like? I know when we've been here, there's been people tooting the car horns coming past, but what would you say to people who are critical of striking workers, saying, you know, you should be working right now?
Tell them to come to the hospitals, come and have a look and see what's going on for themselves. You know, we can't say it any more clearer. We are there wanting to respond, and while we're doing these strikes, we can respond as we need to be. We are there then.
And what would you think the government are listening? You know, do you think these strikes are working?
Not at all. No, I haven't heard anything from the government yet. Obviously, you've got Scotland that are in talks. You've got Wales in talks. Why are we not in talks?
But will you just, you know, keep on the picket lines until you listen to?
Yeah, ultimately, that's the way it's going to go.
And of course, it must feel bad when you work in healthcare and you know you are having to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you were saying you don't get paid, do you, if you're not going out to jobs?
Whilst we're here, we're not getting paid at all. If we do respond to the jobs, then yeah, we get paid for the time that we do work. But whilst we're here, we're not getting paid.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for sharing with us. So that's Joe's view, and it's the same view that's been echoed across picket lines that I've been to this morning as well, that yes, there is a pay rise that's wanted, but it's about the terms and conditions, and it's about keeping people in the role as well. If they feel overstretched, they're going to be leaving the profession, and then that gap is needing to be filled by more workers.
Yeah, indeed, and therefore the problem of retention, as NHS bosses have underlined. Anna, thank you very much for updating us there on that particular picket line. But let's speak now to Jason Killins, who's Chief Executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service. Jason, thanks for joining us once more here on GB News. Update us, if you will, where the situation is. I gather some of the unions have withdrawn their action because of this payoff, which I think I'm saying is about 3% on top of the 4.75% already given to several grades. So, I mean, is a deal in the offing there?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, Mark. It's good to be with you again. So, as you say, here in Wales, whilst we do have some industrial action underway in the ambulance service today by Unite, the union, and indeed, actually, that's a 48-hour package of industrial action today and through to midnight tomorrow. What we have seen over the last few days is constructive talks with government, obviously, who essentially the pay dispute is with. It's not with us as the employers, and the unions, with a revised offer being put to the unions at the end of last week. Now, for RCN, so for nurses, and for GMB, they have postponed their industrial action whilst they put that new revised offer to their members. Unite are continuing with the action for the 48 hours, but again are going to put that offer to their members. And as you say, essentially it's 3% over and above what had already been offered, and half of that would be consolidated and half of it be a non-consolidated payment.
So does that mean that the part of it is like a one-off payment, if you like, rather than added in on a yearly basis?
Exactly that. So 1.5% of the offer is consolidated on people's salaries, and then 1.5% non-consolidated as a one-off payment is the offer. But of course, that's subject to further discussion and the views of individual union members.
Yeah, I think Maria Caulfield, the health minister, is saying a deal in Wales is not yet guaranteed. But of course, this is a devolved administration, which makes a difference in terms of how the sort of chess pieces are moved around, if you like. But we were hearing from the picket line in there in Castleford, and they were making an interesting point as well. It's not just about the pay, it's about the frustration of how the ambulance service is being used. And they touched on this issue of the social care as well, i.e. trying to get the beds available to get patients in from the ambulance into a hospital ward.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, the package and the colleague from Yorkshire talking, shared his experience, which is one which I've heard from many of my staff here in Wales. They described to me a situation where they are deeply frustrated because they are unable to provide the great care that they joined the ambulance service for, and indeed that's what I joined for, many years ago. They want to be out there in people's homes, in our communities, providing great care, and they feel they can't do that because of the pressure across health and social care, which ultimately means that they're delayed at the emergency department in handing over patients. That leads to delays in the community, in our ability to respond, and of course pressure then on all of our staff, be they our brilliant staff in our control rooms, in our contact centres, so our call handlers or clinicians on the street. So when I've been talking to my staff here in Wales in the last couple of weeks, they've been describing to me a deeply kind of conflicted set of circumstances for them, where on the one hand, they want to get out on the streets and provide great care, but on the other, they now feel that the pressure is such for them that they need to support the messages that their trade unions are sending about the rest of the pressure across the rest of the health and social care system.
Yeah, and obviously it's not just the unions. I think Dr. Adrian Boyle, President of the Royal College of Emergency Care, stressing how important it is in terms of patient safety, of staff retention, actually keeping staff who have got some seniority and some experience. And I guess that's a problem you've been dealing with as well.
It certainly is, and we have seen increased attrition. So people leaving the ambulance service in recent years, and certainly here in Wales, we've seen increased numbers of people leaving at the back end of last year, and in our contact centres too. So having an experienced workforce is very important, not only for training and equipping new staff with the skills that they need to provide care here in the ambulance sector, but also across the rest of the NHS. But of course, retaining staff is also important for morale too. So the dispute, if you like, principally emerges over pay, and of course is with government, but also, staff are explaining to me when I've been talking to them in recent weeks that they're also, taking industrial action because of the pressure across the rest of the system, and what they now feel is their ability to send a message that things need to change.
Yeah, a cry for help. But at least, anyway, some positive signs there for the Welsh Ambulance Service. We'll let you get back to work. I know a busy time for you. But thanks for joining us once more, Jason. Jason Killen's their Chief Executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service. And, of course, we'll keep you updated as we get more from across the country. Well, next, the private specialist team of divers that's arrived at the scene to help the search for Nicola Bulley in the waterways of St Michael on Wye, that village in Lancashire. These are the latest pictures we're getting of an incident unit and incident support coming in. This is following the theory from police that the 45-year-old had fallen into the river, but family and friends questioning that assertion, saying there was still no evidence. So this specialist group, as we saw there, has been called in by the family who've got sonar equipment. So let's get the latest now with our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, who's in Lancashire. And Sophie, clearly the family now is starting to question the police approach. What do they believe that this extra sonar equipment could tell them?
Well, this sonar equipment, I must say, the boat itself has just set off in literally the last few seconds. So the search with SGI has officially now begun in terms of finding Nicola Bulley. The sonar itself is around half a metre. It's bright yellow, and SGI say it can detect any stick or stone that's on the riverbed. Now, in the last few moments, the founder of SGI, Peter Faulding, has told the media that if they can't find Nicola in the next 3 to 4 days, then he's confident that she is not in that stretch of river that had been checked. Now, as far as we know, the search will begin here and then continue down the river up towards the estuary, which is in near Fleetwood. So it's a lot of ground to cover. It's around 12 miles from here to that point. Although SGI say that with this specialist sonar equipment, they think they can get the job done in around a day or a day and a half. But I'm going to be bringing you updates on that as we get them.
Yeah, as you say, obviously a long stretch of river, and there's a tidal section then as it heads out towards the sea at Fleetwood. But bearing in mind, I gather they'd offered their services very early on, which had not been taken up by the police. And this team has actually been brought in by the friends and family of Nicola.
Well, what we know is that they did offer their services and they've offered them free of charge. We heard yesterday then that help had then now been accepted. Today, we've seen a helicopter with Peter Falding fly over the top as to observe the area. And now we're seeing the SGI team on this boat with the specialist sonar equipment, taking that down the river in order to do what they can to try and find Nicola Bulley.
Yeah, we've got the live pictures which we're watching as we speak to you, Sophie. So they've got this inflatable and what appears to be a monitor, a screen, and presumably that's linked to the sonar device on the river bed. Is there actually a diver in the water as well that's guiding that?
We haven't seen one, but what I will say is my understanding is that the sonar will be using waves in order to try and detect anything that is in the river. It's all very complex. In fact, it's been said that this sonar system is the best in the world. So realistically, if this is unable to find Nicola Bulley, then it seems very unlikely that that's where she is.
Yeah. OK, Sophie, for the moment, thank you for that. But we'll return to you, of course, throughout the afternoon as that operation continues with that specialist equipment. Thanks very much for updating us. Well, stay with us on GB News Live for more on that and, indeed, the details of a second earthquake to hit Turkey, the death toll rising to more than 1,500. Latest details for you coming up next.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, let's update you on the situation in Turkey, where it's reported a second earthquake has hit just hours after it was struck originally by a 7.8 quake. And fears now more than 1,500 people have been killed, thousands more injured. And, of course, the second quake hitting as these rescue teams tried to get to people in these collapsed buildings. Widespread destruction with the rescue teams still trying to assess how many, but fears are it could be up to 10,000 dead because the second quake, we're told, was 7.5 in magnitude in this last hour and quite shallow as well, only 10 kilometres deep. That means, obviously, it has a great effect on the surface. as people were going through the rubble looking for survivors. And indeed, suggestions there'd be more than 40 aftershocks as well hitting those rescue attempts. Well, let's speak now to David Rothery, a professor of planetary geosciences at the Open University. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Dave. I mean, obviously this is ongoing where they're trying to assess what aftershocks there will be as they're going through some pretty perilous conditions already.
Yeah, the aftershocks, you quoted a number of aftershocks, but depends how small an earthquake you're prepared to record and add into the tally. Within the past 10 minutes, there's been a magnitude 6 aftershock, which is pretty big. So the magnitude 7.5 second earthquake is just the biggest of the aftershocks. And these are going to go on, and they will subside, but even if they're not big enough to damage pristine buildings, they'll be big enough to bring down things which have already been weakened and damaged. And
Right.
it's a big risk for rescuers when aftershocks are going on, and very worrying for local people that will feel the aftershocks and be scared by them, even if they're not going to be terribly damaging. Just to feel the ground trembling under you must be horrible. It goes on relentlessly.
Indeed. We're just going to bring in some live pictures, David, as we speak to you, that we're getting from the various locations. I think this is Gaziantep, where obviously the high-rise buildings back here, they've obviously got a situation where some have actually survived and others have just collapsed like they pancaked, which in itself is obviously interesting that some have stayed up. But given I suppose, continuation of the original earthquake, if you like, rather than the aftershocks, they're going to have to be very careful how they operate with these conditions.
They are going to have to be careful. And I would question, this is a pancake building in the foreground. I think there are 3 different concrete floors on top of each other. Why has that building collapsed but the others not? Were they built to the same standards? We know how to build structures that will withstand the kind of shaking you get through being very close to magnitude 7 earthquake. Most buildings survived. Maybe 1 in 10 collapsed. Was it shoddy building? Or was it just bad luck? We don't know yet, but very often corners are cut and the walls are not tied to the floors properly. So if the walls go outward, the intervening floor collapses. And this could be what's happened here. They just weren't built properly. Perhaps. I don't know, looking at this, but I suggest it's likely that some corners were cut in some buildings.
Well, obviously, we don't know if that's a situation where this particular building is concerned, but we should reflect, I guess, that Turkey has a history of earthquakes, and therefore it should be part of their planning and their structural concern when they're putting these things together. But I guess, obviously, in terms of these modern concrete buildings, you have slab floors, and if, as you say, that the walls bow out, that's it, the whole floor just goes.
Yeah, but it costs a few % extra building from scratch to build something where that is impossible to happen. So if you spend just a little bit more when you're building, you can make more resilient structures. It costs a lot more to retrofit an already existing building, but these are recent enough that they ought to have been built to a better standard, perhaps.
Now, as we were saying, that the latest measurement was 7.5, big in itself, but we're also getting these details about how deep it was. Now, why does that make a difference? We're told only 10 kilometres deep, the second major quake. Does that actually cause more vibration, if you like, on the ground level, on the surface level?
Yeah, the measure of magnitude is an estimate of the energy released at the source. So the deeper the source, the less the energy at the surface and the less the ground shaking at the surface. The original one was 17 kilometres, and the quote of 10 kilometres for this biggest aftershock, well, it could be 10, it could be less than 10. They tend not to give a number when it's less than 10. It was clearly closer to the surface. So the shaking above the epicentre may have been just as powerful at this magnitude 7.5 aftershock as the shaking above the epicentre of the original 7.8 earthquake.
And obviously these buildings now weakened by what's happened before. I mean, is there any way that measuring equipment they may have out there could actually assess what will be happening from now on in as these efforts continue to reach people?
We can't predict the pattern of the aftershocks. We know they'll tend to be along known fault lines, and most of them are along the East Anatolian fault here. Typically, aftershocks get weaker over time. I suspect by this time tomorrow there may be no aftershocks greater than magnitude 5, and by Wednesday, none greater than magnitude 4. But that's still a risk of further collapse in an already badly damaged building. And also, as I said, very worrying for people who are living on the streets, feeling the ground trembling all the time.
Yeah, and then I guess the problem for people trying to get families back together and get to shelter is that things, water mains, gas mains are all broken and disrupted. And bearing in mind from Turkey down into Syria, we've got some very cold conditions out there at the moment.
It's cold. Syria's got a lot of war damage, of course. And yeah, within days, the problem may be not so much of rescue as humanitarian aid to people who are without fresh water supplies. I don't know how badly damaged the water mains are, but clearly there will be damage of that sort.
Yeah. Well, this is the situation live, as we were saying, as the rescue efforts continue. But David, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expert analysis, and we'll see what these hours bring, of course, in terms of any further aftershocks. But David from the Open University, thank you very much for your time. Coming up, latest on the awful story of the school headmistress found dead along with her husband and daughter on the school grounds. We'll be updating on the police operation there. First, an update on the other headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 12:32. The death toll from a devastating earthquake that hit Turkey earlier today has risen to more than 1,400, with that figure expected to rise. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. A second powerful quake has also struck the same area, causing further damage as rescue teams continue to search through the rubble for survivors. Thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing are beginning a two-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Minister Maria Caulfield told GB News it's not affordable to meet the union's demands.
We followed an independent process with a pay review body that the union signed up to, and we're very happy with the settlement last year. And it's difficult for us now. If we are to give a pay award to nurses, we'll have to look at teachers, we'll have to look at ambulance drivers. We just can't afford inflation-busting pay rises that the unions are currently demanding.
A private underwater rescue company has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company SGI has been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there's still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her two children to school. The head of Epsom College has been found dead alongside her husband and her 7-year-old daughter. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating but say they're confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, let's update you on this tragic story of the head of a private school, Epsom College in Surrey, being found dead alongside her husband and 7-year-old daughter. Police saying that the bodies of Emma Pattinson, her husband George and daughter Letty were found at the private boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police say they're confident the tragedy is an isolated incident and that there is no third-party involvement, as they say. Well, let's get the latest now at the scene with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. And Paul, there was some suggestions that police were actually taping off the rifle range there at the school, but clearly they'll be doing some widespread investigations there to try and find out what happened over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. Police activity has been ongoing throughout the morning here at this 72-acre site. Epsom College is a huge site. It's rated as the top independent school in the country. 850 pupils here, 60% of whom are day pupils, 40% are boarding. This morning we've seen police vehicles entering the site at various points around the perimeter. We've also seen pupils milling about inside wearing uniforms as the school tries to come to terms with this tragic and shocking loss. The flag's been flying at half-mast above the school as well. This is Emma Pattinson, 45 years old. She's only been head teacher here for 5 months. Before that, she spent 6 years at Croydon High School, and during that time, during the 5 months she was head teacher here, the school became the top-rated independent school in the country. She was found dead along with her husband George, who's 39 years old, a chartered accountant, and their daughter Letty in the early hours of Sunday morning. And really just that news is in itself still trying to sink in with much of the school community. The school saying that the community is going to come together to try to process this grief. Surrey police, as you say, are calling this an isolated incident and they're not seeking any third party in connection with it. So the investigation continues. As to Epsom College, it says the school has appointed Paul Williams as acting headmaster. And the chair of the Board of Governors, Dr. Alistair Wells, has paid tribute to Emma Pattinson, calling her a wonderful teacher, but most of all a delightful person who enriched the lives of many pupils and colleagues throughout her distinguished career. Croydon High School, her previous school, has said she was hugely respected and much loved. She was a warm, energetic, compassionate leader, dedicated teacher and generous, insightful colleague and friend. We've spoken to Surrey Police today and they say that they're not planning on holding any sort of press conference today, but if that changes they will let us know, and of course we'll bring that to you if that is the case.
Indeed, and traumatic circumstances, of course, for all the pupils there trying to come to terms with it. Do we know if classes are continuing today, what the school is trying to do to help all those kids?
The school is open, we know that much, and as I say, we've seen some pupils milling about in uniforms. The school say that counselling will be provided to its pupils, so they haven't explicitly said that there are no lessons today, but one would have thought there won't be any sort of learning today. It'll be about trying to process what has happened and bringing in specialist counsellors who'll be able to start helping the children and the staff as well process what has happened.
Indeed, awful, awful story. But Paul, thanks for updating us And, of course, we'll get more from you as the police release any more details. Thanks very much indeed. Now, let's update you on the situation of Britain's gigafactory, Recharge Industries. An Australian company has now been named as the official buyer for Northumberland's failed gigafactory, Britishvolt. You may remember that went into administration last month after running out of money, leaving the Blythe-based site said to be ideal for production, up for grabs, part of a multi-billion-pound strategy to boost manufacturing in the North East and promising new jobs and seeing levelling up in action. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, who's been there, of course, at the site, joins us now with On the Money. And Recharge is not a stranger to you or our viewers, of course, because we were indicating that they may have actually been a saviour to actually get something rising from the ashes of this.
Indeed. So this site is in Camas, which is next to the deep water port of Blythe, in the northeast of England, Northumberland, just north of Newcastle. I was up there a couple of weeks ago, as you say, Mark, when Britishvolt went into administration, because this site really is seen as a fabulous place to build the batteries, the lithium-ion batteries that will go into the electric vehicles that are becoming, you know, they're already a third of the vehicles that are sold each year at the moment. And when the new petrol and diesel car ban comes in 2030, EVs, as we call them, electric vehicles, will be seen as ubiquitous. And unless we've got a battery-making plant or another one, there's already one near the Nissan site, owned by the Chinese, also in the northeast, then we won't make the cars nearby because the batteries are very heavy. Let's just go through some of the details of this site. So the gigafactory, it's called a gigafactory because it can create batteries of more than a gigawatt in a year.
We're not talking about a double A, are we? It's about the size of a car floor, isn't it?
That's right. So it's going to be a £3.8 billion facility. It's just north of Newcastle, near the port of Blythe, in Camas. Under Britishvolt, the plan was to build about 300,000 lithium-ion EV battery packs per year. If you consider 600,000 to 800,000 cars are made a year in the UK at the moment. We're trying to get that back up to 1 million as it was before the pandemic. So that would be a big chunk of our EV production if all of those batteries stay here in the UK. And this Camas factory was going to create 3,000 jobs with another 5,000 jobs in the supply chain. Now, as we know, Mark, we can move the graphic on. We know that in January 2023, Britishvolt went bust. And we know now that this company, Recharge, has bought the site and the assets at Camas. This site is already hooked up to the national grid. It used to be a power plant. They have broken ground there. They've laid foundations. Some of the remedial work is done. And we know also, Mark, that Recharge have form here. They're already building a gigafactory in Geelong in Melbourne in South Australia, or in Victoria, in the southern part of Australia, to be pedantic, because, of course, Adelaide's in South Australia, and that's opening in 2024. So Recharge were one of a number of companies that bid for this site, and the receivers decided that they would be the best.
Well, they're called preferred bidder, which we assume means that with due process having gone through, they think they've got the money to actually do this. Because obviously Britishvolt had the plans, but they didn't seem to have pockets that were deep enough.
Britishvolt got the planning permission, they got the IP, as we say, the intellectual property, all the title is done on the site. A lot of work has been done. What they also have, Mark, crucially, and the government haven't confirmed this is the case, but I would be amazed if it wasn't still the case, Britishvolt had access to an agreed £100 million credit line from the government that's contingent on the owner of the site raising a certain amount of private sector investment.
It's about 150 million, I think they were talking.
And building a certain amount of the plant, and then the government money kicks in. Britishvolt couldn't sell their vision at this time. Recharge must think they can sell their vision, but still, as far as I know, it's £100 million of government finance.
And the key question for all those who literally lost their jobs because Britishvolt went into it...
About 350, we think.
Will they be able to reapply? Will they have to start from scratch? What are the processes likely to be?
I've put a few calls in, Mark. We have absolutely no idea on any of that. All we know, literally all we know, is that there is a preferred bidder. That preferred bidder is Recharge, And the company has confirmed that that is the case.
So a bit of good news. Things could be moving.
Yeah.
Great. Liam, thank you very much for updating us on that. And, of course, Liam will stay on top of those to provide us all the latest details. Now, let's stay with financial news and sporting news. Manchester City referred to an independent commission by the Premier League over alleged breaches of financial rules. Now, they span a period from the 2009 season up to the 2017-18 campaign, a long period. The league holders alleged to have breached league rules requiring provision in what's called utmost good faith of accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position. Close quotes. Well, in the past few minutes, the club has issued a statement to say Manchester City FC is surprised by the issuing of these alleged breaches of the Premier League rules, particularly given the extensive engagement and vast amount of detailed materials that the EPL has been provided with. It goes on to say the club welcomes the review of this matter by an independent commission to impartially consider the comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence that exists in support of its position. Club going on to say, as such, we look forward to this matter being put to rest once and for all. Let's speak now to sports journalist Ben Jacobs, who can join us. And Ben, just to explain that the problem is for Manchester City, if, of course, the wrongdoing is found in these allegations, they could not only lose points, they could actually be technically kicked out of the league as well.
Absolutely. There's a range of punishments from a points deduction to expulsion to fines, and that's now for the independent commission to recommend. But the key difference is this. The backdrop saw Manchester City investigated by UEFA for financial fair play breaches. They were found guilty and then banned for 2 years from European competition. Manchester City went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and were able to overturn that. And City, as you've just read in the statement, have always denied wrongdoing. But with this particular commission, if found guilty and punished, the Premier League can ultimately be the sole judge. And therefore, there's no Court of Arbitration possibility for Manchester United to try and seek an appeal. So although they would, if punished, exhaust various legal avenues, if they are deducted points or worse, it's a lot harder comparative to the UEFA punishment to get it legally overturned.
Got you. Right, OK. And just to explain to people, this follows an investigation originally by the German publication Der Spiegel. And I think this particular inquiry has lasted some 4 years. So there must be an awful lot of evidence to go through. What will the makeup be of this independent commission that's now going to look at it?
The independent commission has an appointment process. And again, the Premier League don't have any direct say or influence. So that's a little bit further down the line. But what we do know is that Manchester City will have that heard in private, and then publicly the findings will be made at a later date. So the 4-year investigation that you mentioned is very significant, because the fact it's taken us 4 years to get to this point would suggest that this will not be a quick commission or fix as far as a resolution, and therefore Manchester City and the commission may be dragging aspects of this out. And it's important to note that within that 4-year investigation, there's 2 main areas that the commission will consider. One is effectively sponsorship deals for money that was suspected to come from the club's owners and either inflate the books or be classified on them in an incorrect manner. And the other key aspect, which was the sensational part of the Der Spiegel investigation, is these so-called secret shadow contract payments to former Manchester City manager Roberto Mancini. So in effect, under the books, you can only pay so much. Your outgoings have to be balanced under the financial rules. Mancini allegedly comes in, has one contract for around about 1.45 million, then gets secondary payments of close to 2 million in a shadow manner via a different company, which was listing him as a consultant, ultimately contracted to the ownership group and paid out of the UAE. So ultimately, in short, it's a way of paying more money but not classifying it all on the Manchester City books. And that aspect is under investigation as well.
Yeah, and obviously we should reiterate that they are allegations and will have to be, a pretty forensic investigation, I guess, to go through. And similarly, the allegations about Sheikh Mansour supplying money outside of the sponsorship income that was actually overstated, allegedly. That's another part of these 100 issues that they're looking at. But clearly the club making its position clear, saying that they will work to clear the names and denying the alleged breaches. But what happens, therefore, in terms of their position now? Do they just carry on playing and nothing happens until the report is made final?
Yeah, and that's where the time of the report is going to be crucial. So it's business as usual for Manchester City for now. The Premier League have ultimately made a bit of a flex here in terms of their authority, and it becomes up to the Commission to decide the punishment. So Manchester City will continue as normal. The only caveat to that is the reaction of, say, Pep Guardiola, because he said that if he felt misled by Manchester City by any of these investigations, he might walk away. Now, obviously, he's not going to do that until the Commission have ruled. So that's still a long-term aspect. But it is interesting that Manchester City are vociferous. They're clear that they've done no wrongdoing. And they add that a lot of this was overturned by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and therefore they're sticking to their notion that this is a surprising turn of events, and a lot of these breaches have already been discussed in the previous case.
Okay.
But the Premier League going forwards and ultimately saying, we have a different authority, and if we punish you, if these alleged breaches become a reality, then it could result in something like a points deduction, a fine, or even in a worst case scenario, a suspension.
Got it. Ben, thank you very much for taking us through that. We'll see what the Independent Commission comes up with. Thank you very much indeed. Let's update you with some breaking news we're getting now from Huddersfield. And police say a woman's been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after 4 people, including 3 children, were found seriously injured. They say officers were called to an address in Walpole Road in Huddersfield at around 8 o'clock this morning after receiving reports of concern, as they said, from the ambulance service. They then found the 3 young children, 2 boys and a girl, and 1 woman with serious injuries, believed to be caused, they say, by a bladed weapon. All 4 taken to hospital and are now being treated for their injuries, according to West Yorkshire Police. A woman arrested on suspicion of attempted murder as part of that investigation. Detective Chief Inspector Sam Freeman has said inquiries are ongoing into what has clearly been a serious and distressing incident. We fully appreciate the concern it will cause in the local community. Going on to say detectives are conducting inquiries to determine the exact circumstances. An arrest has now been made as part of those investigations. Well, we'll update, of course, as we get more on that from Huddersfield. Now, courts heard how a serving Metropolitan Police officer put his hands around a woman's neck as he raped her, telling her it would be the last thing she ever saw. Well, sentencing has now begun for David Carrick, who admitted 24 counts of rape, as well as charges of sexual assault, controlling and coercive behaviour and false imprisonment. Home and Security Editor Mark White has been at those proceedings at Southwark Crown Court and can join us now. Mark, we're being told this could be 2 days of pretty distressing evidence and a lot of the victims indicating the impact it's had on them.
Yes, it will be a 2-day hearing. We are on that first day at the moment, detailing really the offences that he has pleaded guilty, offences against 12 women, women that he met on nights out through dating apps, some that he'd formed coercive and controlling relationships with, others who were colleagues at work. We've been hearing about one of these incidents, all of them very distressing in the detail that is being relayed to the court here in Southwark. But his first victim in 2003, he'd met in a pub. He told this woman that you couldn't be in safer hands coming home with me as I'm a police officer. But of course, when he got this woman home, she had, in her statement, said that she was not interested in him, but that she was prevented from leaving, that he effectively violently assaulted her before then raping her, at one point reaching for what was described as a black handgun that was hidden behind the bed, pointed that to her head and said, "You're not going anywhere." Now, the prosecution say they don't contend that that was a real firearm. They simply don't know, but clearly for the victim an absolutely devastating and terrifying experience. And as I say, Mark, we've been hearing all of the crimes that he has admitted to against all of those 12 victims. It took place over almost 2 decades while he was indeed a serving Metropolitan Police officer. He joined the Met in 2001 and at one point then transferred to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, those officers who are armed officers who guard these VIP areas like Parliament, Downing Street, various embassies around London. So I say he has pleaded, of course, guilty to all of those crimes, some 48 offences, including 24 counts of rape. And at the end of tomorrow, we will know what his sentence will be. But it will, we know, be a very hefty jail term.
Indeed. Mark, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at Southwark. Indeed, Tom Little KC, who's prosecuting, saying that humiliation was a theme that ran through, indeed, one of his victims, a Met police officer, who said that as a serving officer, she'd been raped by him in 2004, but couldn't report it because of the culture of the Met at that time. More from Southwark Crown Court as it comes through. We'll update you with all the stories in a moment. First, let's get an update on the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A sunny one out there for many. It is turning cloudier across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but most of us will stay dry, and here's the reason why. A big fat area of high pressure sitting over us, and that will dominate our weather for the next few days. There is a weather front approaching the northwest, and the isobars are squeezing together here as well. So it is turning breezy. We may see a little bit of light rain over the Western Isles at times, but otherwise it's dry. A bit more cloud spilling into Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly into the west, but hazy sunshine across eastern Scotland and certainly for most of England and Wales. It's dry, it's bright. It's not particularly warm, but temperatures are close to average, 7 to 9 Celsius, after what was a fairly frosty start to the day. We will see a little bit more rain coming in this evening into the northwest. Weather from what we saw earlier, just edging its way down towards the Highlands by the time we get towards midnight. Further south, clear and cold, frosty, and there'll be a bit more fog around, I suspect, tonight compared to last night across parts of South Wales, the South Midlands and southern England. -2, -3, that's towns and cities, whereas further north with more cloud, more breeze, it won't be as frosty here. Will be a little bit grey and damp across the west of Northern Ireland and the Highlands first thing on Tuesday morning. That band of thicker cloud, the odd spot of drizzle, trying to push southwards. For England and Wales, we'll have that fog. Could take a while to clear, certainly likely to stick around through the rush hour. But then it's a dry, fine and sunny day. Perhaps a little cloudier over northern England and thicker cloud across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland from what was that weather front, but it's really fizzling out as it pushes southwards. Maybe the odd spot of drizzle here and there during Tuesday evening across southwest Scotland. Again, we'll see that frost coming back across the south as we head into Wednesday morning. The rest of the week, largely dry, but turning a little cloudier and slowly turning a little milder as well.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just gone 1. You're with GB News Live and me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime. Thousands of nurses and ambulance workers together walking out in the biggest strike in NHS history. The government accusing the unions of putting lives at risk, but one union leader hit back saying ministers were choosing to punish nurses. We'll have the latest from the picket lines across the country. Specialist diving team now joining the search for missing dog walker Nicola Bulley. They were called in by her family after they questioned the direction of the police investigation. We'll have the latest from our reporter at the scene with the diving team. Turkey hit by a second huge earthquake as rescue efforts were underway, with people rushing from the collapsed buildings. The death toll now in the thousands and is expected to rise significantly. We'll have the latest for you. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, she's been pretty quiet since leaving Number 10 until now, speaking out to defend her economic plans, saying she was never given a realistic chance. And what do you think of that? Email us with your thoughts on all of the stories of the day, gbviews@gbnews.uk. First, an update on all the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 1. At least 1,500 people have been killed after a powerful earthquake struck Turkey earlier today, with the death toll expected to rise. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. A second powerful quake has struck the same area, causing further damage as rescue teams search through the rubble for survivors. Turkish President Erdogan described the quake as the worst disaster to hit Turkey since a similar one struck in 1939.
We do not know how far the number of dead and injured will rise, as debris removal works continue in many buildings in the quake zone. Our hope is that we will recover from this disaster with the least loss of life. We have received several calls for international aid to our country. Offer of assistance from 45 countries, including NATO and the European Union, have reached us.
Thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing are beginning a 2-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Secretary Steve Barkley says a resolution to the strikes needs to come through the independent pay review body.
There's been ongoing pressures on the NHS. Inflation has been higher since last year's pay review body process than was originally forecast, for example, in the spending review 2021. And that's why we've got the evidence in terms of this April that we're working with the trade unions on that will reflect the inflation, reflect those circumstances, but it should be done through the independent pay review body process that can look at both what the NHS needs, but also the wider needs of the economy and the other pressures that many of your viewers are facing.
General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, says the government is punishing nurses.
Nurses deserve and need a decent pay rise. That will boost the economy, not damage the economy, because nurses spend in their local communities. So every NHS worker, including our nurses, deserve a decent pay rise. And here we are in a situation today where this government has chosen to punish the nurses of England instead of getting round a table and talking to me about pay in the same way as they've done in Wales and in Scotland.
Today marks the 16th and final strike day for teachers in Scotland who walked out in a dispute over pay. But more walkouts are on the horizon as there's been no agreement between the teaching unions and Holyrood. The unions are demanding a 10% rise for their members, but the Scottish Government has only offered a 5% increase. A private underwater rescue company has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company SGI have been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there's still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her two children to school. CEO and founder of SGI, Peter Faulding, says they're there to support the police.
Well, we've been tasked by Lancashire Police. We're working closely with them, so we're going to be coming down from the weir and we're going down towards the estuary. There's a fair stretch of river. And we'll be looking at the bottom. I mean, it is deep in places, it's shallow in places. Police, I believe, think that she's in here, and obviously that's where the evidence is actually pointing us at the moment. The police are doing a great job. It's a big task for Lancashire Police to do. This is a particularly long stretch of river to search, and we just bring that backup resource to work closely with them at this instant.
The head of Epsom College has been found dead alongside her husband and her 7-year-old daughter. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating but say they are confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. The Princess of Wales has urged school children to keep talking about their feelings as she marked the start of Children's Mental Health Week. Catherine joined pupils in London's East End in raising the importance of being open with feelings. It's after she launched her Shaping Us campaign last week, which raises the profile of the early years development of children. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's over to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So the biggest day of strike action in the NHS 75-year history. Nurses and ambulance staff taking to the picket lines in their thousands in this ongoing dispute over pay and, of course, conditions. Well, a nurses' two-day strike coordinated by the Royal College of Nursing taking place at some 73 trusts across England with up to 30,000 on the picket lines. Meanwhile, up to 11,500 ambulance staff, members of the GMB and Unite unions, also walking out. That's hitting services in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, although we should say some of the unions in Wales have gone back after what appears to be a pay deal being agreed. Well, ambulance crews and call handlers back to work tomorrow, but then continuing their industrial action on Friday. So what's happening on the picket lines? Let's head to North Devon now and to Barnstaple and join our Southwest of England reporter Jeff Moody there. We can see the flags flying outside that particular hospital, Jeff. And what's the position about the government statements, particularly on the ambulance staff, saying that they hadn't provided enough detail, if you like, on the cover to the government? I mean, I think it's angered quite a few of the union members, isn't it?
Yes, it has. It's angered an awful lot of people over a long period of time, most certainly. As you say, this is the largest day of industrial action for the NHS in its entire 75-year history. Not only the nurses out on strike, as you say, but also the ambulance drivers on the same day, which is the first time that the two have coincided into one massive day of action. If you have an appointment here in North Devon, we're being told that appointments are still going on as expected. Unless you hear otherwise. So if you've got an appointment in North Devon, unless you've heard that it's been cancelled, do come along as scheduled. Don't ring ahead in advance, they're also saying. Anyone has been notified if the appointment has been cancelled. Well, as you say, I'm here on the picket line outside the North Devon District Hospital, and I'm here to speak to one of the staff nurses, Andy. Andy, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Give us some sense of how difficult a decision it's been for you personally to go on strike.
Incredibly difficult. I shouldn't even have to be out on strike. I feel really guilty, but it's something that I feel very strongly that I've had to do.
People are going to say that the service is bad enough at the best of times. If you need an ambulance, for instance, or if you need hospital treatment, the service is pretty shoddy at the best of times, isn't it? And then today, there's hardly any service at all.
It's like this most of the time now. That's why I'm here. I can just do nothing, or I can come on strike and say to everyone, enough is enough. The government must invest more and do something about it.
The government's saying that it is doing things about it, but there is literally no spare cash in the coffers to give to nurses. What do you think about that?
Unfortunately, personally speaking, I don't believe them. There was the PPE fiasco, they found money, all sorts of money for that. We're not wanting to be millionaires, but something has got to be done. It's not sustainable, the situation at the moment.
What do you want to be done?
I want to see more investment in the workforce. It's not right I should have to do overtime shifts just to pay my bills. It's not right student nurses qualify in debt. It's putting people off becoming nurses. We need to think of the future. I've known cutback after cutback over the years. Enough's enough. Something has to be done now.
OK, Andy, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. More strike action taking place tomorrow as well. Back to you, Mark.
Obviously, you're speaking to the nurses there, Jeff, but in particular, of course, I gather the ambulance service there in the southwest of England has had particular problems, not just because of the geographical distances they have to cover down there.
Well, that's right. I mean, the thing with down here is the infrastructure is so bad. There's an awful lot of very, very small country roads that ambulances are having to navigate. And at this particular time of the year, huge potholes in the roads too, in most places. So it has become increasingly difficult for the ambulance service to cover this patch effectively.
Yeah, and obviously conditions as much as pay is exercising. But we'll be back to you a little later, of course, as we get more from the picket lines. Well, let's just reflect on the political reaction. Labour saying that the government is sitting it out. This is what Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer had to say a little earlier.
What I think the country is crying out for is a government that gets round the table and talks to the unions and ends these strikes. Nobody wants to see these strikes. Those people who are on strike don't want to be on strike. The last thing nurses want to do is to be on strike. What they want is the government to get round the negotiating table and talk to them. They've already made clear that if that happens, the strikes will be called off. So I think everybody is now looking to the government. Get off your hands, stop sitting on your hands, get around the table and negotiate. And I think many people watching this be quite shocked to hear from the trade union leaders that the government is not even talking to them at the moment. They're not going to be solving these strikes by just trying to sit it out. Well, if we were in government, we would get around the table and we would negotiate to end these strikes. I think that's what the country is crying out.
But what level of pay would you give them?
Well, look, I mean, if we were in government, I wouldn't do an interview with you telling you beforehand what rate of pay we would agree. But we would get round the table. I think it's common sense. Nobody wants to be on strikes. The strikes are hugely disruptive. There's only one way to solve this. That's round the negotiating table. You can see in Wales that's already produced results. I think for so many people who are put out by these strikes, they just want the government to get round the table and negotiate. And I think for the government to say we're not even going to get in the room is completely unacceptable. They're not leading here. They're sitting on their hands. And in the middle of a dispute like this, completely unacceptable.
Keir Starmer bringing us his reaction to today's industrial action. Let's speak now to Azizat Sanusi. He's a medical student and an agency nurse joining us in Brighton. And Azizat, I assume that means you're not part of this NHS strike today, but of course it is an issue that many nurses are thinking about doing because they can earn, what, 3 or 4 times the money by going into agency nursing.
Yeah, absolutely. 4 times more what you would earn as an NHS staff is what you would earn working agency. Like, agencies go as far as paying nurses £60–70 an hour, and nurses can take home up to 10 grand a year working agency on some packages. So it is quite attractive to a lot of nurses, and that's why I feel like nurses that have dedicated their time and their life to work in the NHS should be greatly rewarded.
Yeah, and the other issue, of course, about conditions where a lot of nurses are saying, you know, things are getting more and more difficult on the wards. When you go in then on an agency shift, is it that you had to sort of pick up the pieces almost?
Not particularly, because with agency, because you're not regular on the particular ward, if you go to a ward and it's difficult, you tend to then want to go to the easier wards. So because as an agency staff, you have a choice, and most of the time we know the places that are easier to work. Right. For example, even some agency nurses will opt for private hospitals than the NHS hospitals. And even in the NHS hospital, they know the NHS wards that are easier to work, and so that they don't have to go through the stress that the NHS nurses go through.
So agency nursing not the answer then, because clearly the most demanding areas and the most stressful, you're not going to go in there and fill the gaps?
No.
What would persuade you to go into the NHS system and actually work on NHS conditions? What would actually attract you?
I think for me it would be a better pay. Not for the government to pay nurses millions. I'm not looking to be a millionaire or billionaire by working as a nurse, but just, you know, a better work condition, a safer working condition for the patient, so that I can provide quality care, and also a working environment that can allow me to have a better quality of life and perhaps, you know, great job satisfaction, which is what I get working as an agency nurse. So at the moment, the negotiation is, you know, a pay rise of 10 to 19%. You know, if the government can do something, I would be encouraged to go back and work in the NHS, especially if, you know, the staff to nurses ratio could be improved than what it used to be.
Yeah, as you say, to provide, as you say, proper care. Well, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your particular view on that, which is an interesting aspect in Brighton. Thank you for your time, as you sat. And of course, we'll update you from the picket lines as well. But what about the political ramifications of all this? Let's speak now to our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's joining us in the studio. We're hearing there from Keir Starmer, and they're accusing the government of trying to sit this out. However, we've also got Steve Barkley yet again appearing to sort of, you know, divide and rule. On one hand saying, well, the RCN, yes, you know, they're behaving rather responsibly, but all these ambulance unions, they're not doing it the right way.
Yes, so the issue now, it all has sort of crystallised around the issue of whether to backdate potential pay rises next year to cover the year of 2023-24. And a few weeks ago, Steve Barkley was suggesting that he would be prepared to consider a backdated pay rise when they discuss pay rises for the 2024-5 year, going back to 22-23. Now, he's saying that he won't do that. It seems as though the Treasury has put its foot down.
Right.
Now, why is that? One potential answer is that in Scotland and Wales, neither government has agreed to backdate the pay rise, and nevertheless, it seems as though the RTN in both Scotland and Wales is backing down and cancelling the strikes, definitely in Scotland, probably in Wales. So maybe the government thinks that it can get a similar deal. That's not at all certain, because Pat Cullen's relationship with Steve Barkley is not good at all. Yeah. Or, as you say, it could be a divide and rule strategy going on here. There's a breakdown, a very good breakdown in the Telegraph of how the support for the strikes, both from the public perspective and from the actual strikers' perspective.
But the ballots.
But the ballots, exactly. Yeah. And it differs wildly, as you might expect. So support for ambulance workers and nurses among the public is above 60%, which is high. For civil servants and train drivers, for example, it's very low. And the strikers themselves, you can see that the ballots for ambulance strikers are very high, that the unions are winning the vast majority of ambulance worker support when they vote for strikes.
GMB and Unite.
Exactly.
Mainly, yeah.
But on the nurses, only half of trusts, regional trusts, have agreed to strike. So the RTN has very high numbers in some areas, but very low numbers in others.
That's interesting, because Pat Cullen, the General Secretary of the RCN, she came out with this quote, basically talking about the nurses taking action. They've given me the strongest mandate of any nursing profession throughout the world, close quotes. Not quite the case, then?
Well, in some areas, that is absolutely true. In others, much less so. I think it's the West Midlands where actually the RTN isn't winning huge support. Also, it's not true to say that all nurses are members of the RTN. There are other unions involved. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And the government clearly hopes that it can, in holding out like this, because a few weeks ago it was suggested that they would backdate pay rises, which would solve the problem.
Even if it's done on like a one-off basis?
Yes,
rather than,
exactly. That was what was being suggested, but Steve Barkley seems to have backed down on that. So the Treasury appears to have put its foot down, perhaps because it calculates that public support for these strikes will ebb away when people realise what damage it's doing. But so far, we're seeing very, very little sign of that. Although public support for train strikers is definitely going down, the NHS, it remains very solid.
And we had Junior Health Minister Maria Caulfield saying this could cost billions to reopen this year's pay settlement too, because of what it would do for teachers, rail workers, etc. That it provides a template, if you like, deal. However, the difficulty for the government is, as we were speaking to the Welsh ambulance service earlier, it looks as if, I think it was 4.5 with an extra 3% on top will do the deal, that they will accept going back on that sort of basis.
Yes, and in Scotland, a deal has already been reached. So it's increasingly, in a way, the government... It's sort of good news and bad news for the government, because on the one hand, Maria Caulfield and other government ministers can stand up and say, look, a deal has been reached in Scotland without backdating the pay. But on the other hand, it's looking increasingly as though Pat Cullen, the chief of the RCN's relationship with Steve Barkley, which is very bad indeed, is perhaps making the problems worse than they need to be. If deals can be reached, as Keir Starmer suggests, in Scotland and Wales, then what is it about the Conservative government's relationship with Pat Cullen that's making this deal impossible to reach?
And how much wriggle room, if you like, does Steve Barkley have with the Treasury, obviously, on the purse strings? Indeed. Olivia, thank you very much indeed for taking us through that, a complicated situation. And we'll update you as we get more on what's happening with this biggest day of industrial action in the NHS. Also coming up, a second earthquake hits Turkey in the past couple of hours, and of course down into the borders with Syria. We'll find out what that's doing for the rescue effort. Let's take a short break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride. Oh, she's on it today! Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're watching GB News Live. Now let's update you on the search in Lancashire for Nicola Bulley, with a private specialist team of divers arriving at the scene now to help in the search of St Michael's on Wyre and the river itself, the Wyre. Police had been working on the theory that the 45-year-old had fallen into the water, but her family and friends have questioned that assertion, saying there's still no evidence. Well, the head of the private diving team saying he's confident they will find Nicola if she has fallen into the river. Let's get the latest now from Lancashire, and our northwest of England reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been following events this morning. And Sophie, you were telling us earlier about this sonar equipment that they're using, which perhaps we're more used to in submarines.
Absolutely, yes. Well, the SGI team has now joined the search for the 45-year-old Nicola Bulley. The sonar equipment itself, they say, is the absolute best in the world, and that it can detect every single stick and stone that may be on the riverbed. About an hour ago, the founder of SGI, Peter Faulding, told the media that if they've not found Nicola in the next 3 to 4 days, then he is confident that she is not in the part of the river that they've been checking. Here's what else he had to say.
I think it's a bit of a long stretch to go to the sea, knowing from my experience, normally drowning victims go in and they're normally within 200 or 300 metres or very near where they went in. So I don't think she would have gone a long way. The river is not in flood from the first time I've seen it today. If we had storms and there was lots of flood water, then I would expect in the high flow for a body to get carried. But once a drowning victim goes to the bottom, they tend to stay on the bottom for 7 or 8 days, and they sort of just move slowly along the bottom. But that, again, if it's flooded, that's different, but it's not.
And what happens now, Sophie, because as you were saying earlier, is a 12-mile stretch, which is an awful lot of river to cover, part of it a tidal stretch. But we're thinking this equipment can actually literally map the sections as they go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was speaking to a different member of the SGI team just a few moments ago, and he told me that the team will continue to work today until they're physically unable to. So whether they run out of fuel or they run out of light, until that happens, they're going to continue working. He also told me a little bit about how the sonar itself works, which is really quite interesting. So aboard the boat that has the sonar with it, there's a person who's observing the live feed of what it's picking up. And if they get what he called a hit, then they're able to view that, and a response can then be actioned. And if necessary, divers can then be deployed to really get into it and check exactly what's been found. So as you say, it's a 12-mile stretch, or around that anyway, between where I am here, where they believe Nicola was last seen, and where the river meets the estuary in Fleetwood. So there's quite a lot to check, but they've told us that they think they can do the entire thing within a day or a day and a half. So we should be seeing results very, very soon.
OK, Sophie, thank you for updating us there. Back to you, of course, as we learn more, as that progresses down the river towards the coast at Fleetwood. Well, let's now speak to former police crime commissioner, senior lecturer, and indeed one of the team of Sussex police involving with the Sarah Payne investigation, Martin Underhill, joining us now. Martin, thank you for your time. As we were discussing earlier with Sophie, the team's been brought in on this sonar search by the family and friends, and they're questioning this assertion by Lancashire police that she has fallen into the water.
Hi, Mark. Well, to be honest, so am I. I'm finding this all very odd and slightly concerning, because there's, as someone who used to run murder inquiries and now lectures on murder inquiries, there are 2 golden rules in any case like this. One is to respect the golden hour. The first 24 hours are absolutely crucial to a case like this. Yeah. And the second is to keep an open mind. And to hear the police say that this is a tragic accident, on what we've got in the public domain at the moment, I cannot understand that statement. And at a stroke of a pen, by saying that, they are reducing the publicity. They are clearly upsetting the family, who are now speaking out against them. And they are putting all the eggs in one basket, which professionally I find very odd.
And obviously the family now upset by a lot of conjecture on social media and elsewhere. You know, is there something they know they're not telling us about why they actually dismissed any kind of criminal involvement so early on?
Well, quite. And we do know from what they've told us that they have a CCTV black spot, a place where someone could have gone into that field. And we know that they've got a 10-minute window, which they can't account for. Well, you only have to look at the Julia Jones case in Kent a couple of years ago. The lady, the PCSO off-duty, walking her dog, who was tragically attacked.
Yeah.
That attack, less than 1 minute. A 10-minute window, you cannot rule out criminality. You cannot rule out a third party being at that location. And of course, with Sarah Payne, we had 9 different hypotheses as to what happened to that little girl. With Nicola, there's 7 different hypotheses. Only one of them is she fell in the river. So I am very confused by this, and I feel for the family, because you try and keep the publicity up, you try and keep hope up by exploring every angle, every line of inquiry. And what the police need to do now is explain why they've shut 8 of those 6 out of those 7 nights of inquiry down.
And one feels for the 2 kids involved, of course, still waiting about news for their mum. But just to go back about what we know so far, I was going to ask you whether this 10-minute window is actually a help or a hindrance in terms of trying to work out what happened where, because clearly they've said there's no signs of skid marks or feet or whatever going into the river or even away from that bench, and the phone's still there on the bench as well.
I cannot believe that you've got senior officers saying this is clearly a tragic accident. There is a lot to suggest this could have been an unexpected attack or a kidnap of a lady distracted on her phone and with a dog. And don't forget, the dog was found dry and out of its harness, both of which are unusual if she's fallen in the river. I have dogs. If I fell in the river, my dogs would jump in with me. So this just doesn't ring true. And I'm not sure why they're doing this. The police need to answer this concern, because I'm not the only person, the ex-professional, saying this is very odd. The police need to reassure people and reassure the family, otherwise they're going to lose the family.
And what happens in terms of police forces asking for outside help? I mean, I think I'm right in saying Sussex Police did have some extra help coming in terms of manpower and so on, but just also new lines of thought and inquiry.
So there's 2 things that I'm surprised hasn't happened yet. The first one, and you're right, Mark, mutual aid, as we call it, would always be called in a case like this. Lancashire's not a very big police force, neither was Sussex, neither was Dorset, but I've just left. So mutual aid is quite common in this sort of case. But what they haven't done, which actually is recommended after 9 days, is be reviewed by another force, an outside force coming in, just sense checking that they're doing this right. And actually, to reassure the family and to reassure me and various other professionals watching this strange development, I think they should now call in an outside force to review.
And just have a fresh pair of eyes looking over everything. Interesting thought. Martin, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your expert opinion. Good to speak to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Well, of course, we'll keep you updated with Sophie at the scene about the search continuing. Also, the latest on the head teacher at Epsom College found dead yesterday alongside a husband and 7-year-old daughter. Another awful tragedy. Let's get an update indeed on all the news headlines now with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom at 1:33. The UK has joined the international effort to aid Turkey in the aftermath of the devastating earthquake that has killed more than 1,700 people. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says search and rescue specialists, as well as rescue equipment, would arrive this evening. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. A second powerful quake has struck the same area, causing further damage as rescue teams search through the rubble for survivors. Thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is beginning a 2-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Secretary Steve Barkley says a resolution to the strikes needs to come through the independent pay review body.
There's been ongoing pressures on the NHS. Inflation has been higher since last year's pay review body process than was originally forecast, for example, in the spending review 2021. And that's why we've got the evidence in terms of this April that we're working with the trade unions on that will reflect the inflation, reflect those circumstances, but it should be done through the independent pay review body process that can look at both what the NHS needs, but also the wider needs of the economy and the other pressures that many of our viewers are facing.
A private underwater rescue company has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company, SGI, has been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there's still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her 2 children to school. Epsom College has asked for time and space after the deaths of the school's head and her family. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating, but say they are confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Now, welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on this terrible tragedy at Epsom College in Surrey, the private school where the head teacher was found dead alongside her husband and 7-year-old daughter. Police saying the bodies of Emma Patterson, her husband George and daughter Letty, all found at the private boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Well, Surrey police say they're confident the tragedy is, as they say, an isolated incident with no other third-party involvement. Let's get more with our national reporter Paul Hawkins now, who joins us outside the school. And Paul, clearly incredibly difficult for everyone there, with the police inquiries continuing, with, as we understand, many people still there trying to assess what's gone on over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really difficult time for the friends and family of the victims, and also for the school itself. Epsom College describing its community as coming together to try and process the shock and grief that they are feeling at the moment. In terms of the police investigation, that is ongoing. Officers have been seen entering various parts of the 72-acre site. It's a big site, it's a big independent school founded in 1853, 850 pupils here, 60% of them day pupils, 40% board here. So it's a big site, and the flags here have been flying at half-mast, and the police have been entering various points on the ground, including the one behind me. Each entrance to the site guarded by security guards in high-vis, watching and checking the vehicles as they enter. We know that forensics are inside at the moment, continuing their investigation. There's a police cordon around the property where the victims were found. But yeah, this is a school that is trying to come to terms with what has happened. The school has appointed Paul Williams as acting headmaster. The chair of the Board of Governors, Dr. Alistair Wells, has paid tribute to Emma Patterson, the head, who'd only been here for 5 months. She was, before that, 6 years at Croydon High School, so she hadn't been here that long, but the school, in her time that she was here, had already been named the best independent school in Britain. But Dr. Alistair Wells calling her a wonderful teacher, but most of all a delightful person who enriched the lives of many pupils and colleagues throughout her distinguished career. Her previous school, Croydon High School, said she was hugely respected and much loved. She was a warm, energetic, compassionate leader, dedicated teacher and generous, insightful colleague and friend. But the grieving process has started here, and the police investigation continues.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. More, of course, from you as police release details, but awful tragedy. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Manchester City referred to an independent commission by the Premier League over alleged breaches on financial rules. They span, indeed, the period from the 2009 season all the way up to the 2017-18 campaign. The Premier League holders alleged to have breached league rules requiring provision in utmost good faith of, quote, accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position, close quotes. Well, since it was announced, Manchester City have issued their own statement to say Manchester City FC is surprised by the issuing of these alleged breaches of the Premier League rules, particularly given the extensive engagement and vast amount of detailed material that the EPL has been provided with. They went on to say the club welcomes the review of this matter by an independent commission to impartially consider the comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence that exists in support of its position. The club adding, as such, we look forward to this matter being put to rest once and for all. Let's speak to sports broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee, who joins us in the studio. And indeed, Aidan, you've followed this story for quite a time, because I think the inquiry or the investigation that's been going on has been some 4 years, following, I think, some original stories in Der Spiegel, the German magazine.
Yeah, it came from Football Leaks, actually, which was the equivalent of WikiLeaks, the Julian Assange thing, but a football version of it, if you like. Julian Assange has nothing to do with it, to be clear. But in terms of incomings and outgoings, in the context of financial fair play, it's in a club's interest to make their incomings look as big as possible and to make their outgoings look as low as possible.
As a commercial concern.
Absolutely, to show that you're sustainable. The days of just loading debt on the club are gone, sadly, for some of the investors who want to come into it. Now, the issue here is that I guess there's a way of looking at these deals and assessing whether they're commensurate to what they'd be worth in a normal marketplace. Now, the issue is that football is almost a microclimate in terms of its economy. It's not like comparing High Street store with High Street store. Yes, there are other Premier League clubs that you can compare to, but the difficulty here in assessing how much punishment City are going to be handed down is going to come in how easy it is to look at the value of commercial deals in comparison to other ones.
And therein lies the story. I mean, I think there are some 100 alleged breaches, but it could be that not only are they deducted points, but they're actually kicked out of the league effectively for this season.
Well, there's no upper ceiling in terms of the Premier League's rulebook on what could happen. We're in uncharted territory. I suppose you could look at Juventus just a couple of months ago and see they were deducted 15 points. That would really harm Manchester City in the Premier League this season. If that happened, you might say, well, actually, they're not in an imperious position in the Premier League this season. Maybe they might take it as long as it didn't affect their status within Europe. You could look at the Rangers situation in Scotland with the EBT, the Employment Benefit Trust, which basically saw players paid over a number of years using a tax avoidance scheme, which meant they could earn a lot more at, say, Rangers than they could with their rivals. They were demoted 3 divisions, and they had to fight their way back in. It took them 5 years.
And Man City have got a bit of previous. UEFA originally putting a 2-year ban on them and £25 million fine. Now, that was overturned 2020, cut to £9 million. Still
the difference here. The difference here is that there is no recourse to the court for arbitration in sport. That's the issue here. So they can't really go that route. But in addition, they'll have top lawyers. They'll be able to stall the process. There's a political angle to this as well, Mark. We have a white paper going through Parliament this week. It's going to be waved through, if briefings are to be believed, which will see the onset or the creation of a football regulator. The Premier League do not want that. They need to be proving, by turning on one of their own, that they're able to keep their own house in order. It's very rare that you see the Premier League turn on one of their own as the way they are now. Having said that, long term, even though they don't want their books going through, or being gone through with a fine-tooth comb by anybody external, they don't really want to turn their own long term. I don't think City.
But will the Premier League have to accept what these independent commissioners come up with? And do we know who they will be? I mean, presumably, a lot of this has got to be pretty forensic examination of the books.
Yes, they will, but then City will respond in kind. This is what's got them out of problems in the past. But I don't think long term the likes of Chelsea or Newcastle really want Manchester City dealt with in such strong terms. Chelsea, for example, just spent £300 million, close to, in the January transfer window. The problem they will be assessing, like when the EFL investigated Derby County, they couldn't even prove that their stadium, which they sold, they said they sold for £80 million. They couldn't prove that the real estate was actually worth that. I don't know how they're going to prove that the Etihad deal for the naming rights, for example, is worth its true value.
And an added complication that they are effectively foreign owners of the club as well?
Not really, only in as much as City might brief that this might be an issue over xenophobia, for example. Maybe the established forces in the Premier League haven't liked their introduction over the last 14 years. But to be fair, City have always said they've complied with the rules. They said earlier on, even when I was working up there, they wanted to operate within the bounds of EFP. Sorry, FPP.
Yeah, and they've had to cope with a certain Harry Kane as well.
Yeah, it's not been a great weekend.
No.
It's not been a great weekend. But yeah, he broke the club scoring record, superseding Jimmy Greaves, of course, which has stood since the 60s. He is hot on the tails now with 200 Premier League goals, of Alan Shearer's record of 260. He's surpassed some quite key protagonists on there as well, Wayne Rooney among them. So,
and you know, with that sort of parallel of Rooney, still the question as to why he can't turn it on in the World Cups and the big tournaments as he can at the club aspect. And I think I was reading that Jimmy Greaves' son saying, don't try and compare him with my dad. And, you know, when you remember Greaves in his heyday at Spurs, I mean, that was...
Well, that was a trophy-winning side, but you would argue that at that time he had better players around him. Harry Kane hasn't got Alan Murray around him, for example, or Aaron Gilsey.
Mike England,
or Dave Mackay, etc. You know, so that's the difference. And also, it's pointless comparing eras. Anyway, some would say that the standard now is much, much higher than it was then, so...
The fitter,
fitter, and the demands on the game. You know, there are more teams competing at the top now than they were then, but equally... I'd have to say that, you know, with Harry Kane, look at his record for England. I think the personal attainment that he's achieved so far is very good.
And the way that he's conducted himself.
Yeah, and looking at if you're looking at him winning Champions Leagues and Premier Leagues, well, he's only in the last 18 months of his contract, he still has a big move in him if he wants to go to a club that wins trophies on a regular basis, i.e. Manchester City. Others would say if he played with a team if he played for the team that didn't adhere to the rules, as is being alleged against Manchester City, maybe he would have won trophies, but what would they be worth?
I can't see Spurs wanting to let him go now, can you? But
well, last 18 months of their contract, they want to realise some value on him.
Well,
this summer, I think he'll leave.
Yeah. OK, Aidan, thank you for that, and we'll see what emerges in this particular independent investigation, of course, into Man City. Now, let's return to this story of the serving Metropolitan Police officer accused of these charges of rape. The court, Southwark Court hearing, he's put his hands around a woman's neck as he raped her, telling her it would be the last thing she ever saw. Well, sentencing has begun for David Carrick, who'd admitted 24 counts of rape, as well as charges of sexual assault, controlling and coercive behaviour, and even false imprisonment. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has been following proceedings at Southwark Crown Court. And, Mark, it's pretty unedifying stuff, learning how effectively he humiliated these women as well.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult and distressing evidence to listen to during the course of this morning here at Southwark Crown Court. It's broken for lunch at the moment, and we're expecting sometime this afternoon to get on to victim impact statements for the 12 victims of David Carrick. Now, he has pleaded guilty to multiple offences, more than 50 or around 50 counts, some of those multiple offences that took place while he was a serving police officer over an almost 2-decade period. And what we heard this morning was those crimes detailed in really excruciating detail. We heard from the first of his victims in terms of, in written form anyway, the ordeal that she suffered in July of 2003. She'd met this man in a local pub. He'd persuaded her to go back to his house. He'd told her, by way of trying to persuade her to go home with him, that you couldn't be in safer hands, that he's a police officer. She did go back home with him, but said she wasn't interested in anything further with him, but he prevented her from leaving. There was effectively a violent struggle that he forced himself upon this woman and raped her multiple times. At one point, he was fumbling around the bed looking for something, and he produced what was described as a black handgun that he held against this woman's head, say, "You're not going anywhere." Now, the prosecution say they're not contending that that was a real weapon, they simply don't know, but clearly for the victim in this case, absolutely terrifying. She, after she was finally able to leave his house, went to hospital, to the A&E department of her local hospital for a proper examination. At that point, she spoke to an A&E nurse, the court heard. That A&E nurse said, you know, if she was thinking of making a formal complaint, it might be a difficult process for her and she might not get the outcome that she wants in this, the sense of this being before the courts. As a result of that conversation, the victim actually didn't then put in a complaint of rape to the police, and she was one of the final victims actually to come forward when all of the publicity surrounding David Carrick hit the headlines a couple of years ago. So as I say, anyway, David Carrick in court as he's listening, of course, to the crimes that he committed played out for the court, and we will get those victim impact statements this afternoon.
And we think then, quickly, Mark, sentencing tomorrow?
Yeah, sentencing at some point tomorrow. Once we've heard, after the victim impact statements, there will be mitigation and aggravating factors, obviously, from the prosecution and from David Carrick's defence. In his favour, obviously, is the fact that he did plead guilty before this went to trial. But the aggravating factors speak for themselves. Many, many offences involving many victims and someone who held this position of trust and abused that position of trust to coerce and cajole and terrify his victims into these sexual acts.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. And we'll bring you more, of course, from Southwark Crown Court as we hear it. Awful, awful situation there. Now, let's think about some more enterprising matters and the world of music with the Grammys. Beyoncé smashing the record books, becoming its most decorated star of all time. Picked up 32nd award at this year's ceremony, winning Best Dance Electronic Music Album for Renaissance. But good news for the Brits. Biggest Gong Album of the Year going to Harry Styles for his third album, Harry's House. And boy, wasn't he pleased. Well, joining us now to discuss all the runners and riders, Rebecca Twomey, who's been following events there in LA. And, well, I think there were 2 awards, weren't they, for Harry Styles? I mean, he's really sort of come of age now, hasn't he?
I think Harry Styles has had to work incredibly hard to be recognised as a serious artist, and this is a massive accolade for him. He had one of the best-selling songs previously, and now he's just picked up Best Pop Vocal Album. But the real reaction around the Grammys was, why on earth hasn't Beyoncé ever won that accolade? Now she's done incredibly well. We just heard that she had broken a lot of Grammys records, but everyone's wondering, what does Beyoncé have to do to get the Best Pop Album? But Harry Styles, former One Direction X Factor star, has really been coming on to his own. It'll be very exciting to see what he does next. But all talk was very, very much around Beyoncé. It wasn't without controversy. She said that she dedicated her album to her LGBTQI fans. She said her album is heavily influenced by that scene. But only recently, she just performed in Dubai, causing a lot of controversy there, where obviously they've got terrible rights for gay people, and that's one big controversy. Another part of the evening as well was that Sam Smith and Kim Petras, they got Best Pop Duo Group Performance for their track Unholy. And what's interesting here is that it's the first trans woman to have ever won this award. So Sam Smith actually stepped back and let Kim have her moment in the spotlight for this speech. And as we know, Sam Smith's latest music video has also caused some offence as well. So there's always, with music, lots of controversy, but really the standout star was very much Beyoncé.
Yeah, and Adele cried again, right on cue. But let's also perhaps wave the flag for Bonnie Raitt, Song of the Year at the age, what was he, 73, I think?
Yes, it was amazing. You saw Ozzy Osbourne get Best Rock Album, which is a wonderful accolade because he's been battling some ill health. And it's always nice to see a more mix of artists, because sometimes music can be very much dominated by the young, sexy things. And actually, it's nice sometimes to sort of honour the whole spectrum of music. And what's nice about these awards is that it has provided quite a big platform for lots of different artists. Viola Davis is another artist who has now managed to get an Oscar. I have to remember all of this. She's managed to get an Oscar, a Grammy, a Tony Award and an Emmy, because she also nabbed something for her audiobook. So it's amazing to see just women of colour also coming up the ranks.
Yeah, getting the full whack, which is excellent news, as you say, but some great performers and great performances as well. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for updating us and joining us here at GB News. Well, stay with us, because we'll have the very latest, of course, on all these strikes coming up, and indeed the latest on this earthquake, a second hitting Turkey. Before that, let's get an update on the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A sunny one out there for many. It is turning cloudier across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but most of us will stay dry, and here's the reason why. A big fat area of high pressure sitting over us, and that will dominate our weather for the next few days. There is a weather front approaching the northwest, and the isobars are squeezing together here as well. So it is turning breezy. We may see a little bit of light rain over the Western Isles at times, but otherwise it's dry. A bit more cloud spilling into Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly into the west, but hazy sunshine across eastern Scotland and certainly for most of England and Wales. It's dry, it's bright. It's not particularly warm, but temperatures are close to average, 7 to 9 Celsius, after what was a fairly frosty start to the day. We will see a little bit more rain coming in this evening into the northwest. Weather from what we saw earlier, just edging its way down towards the Highlands by the time we get towards midnight. Further south, clear and cold, frosty, and there'll be a bit more fog around, I suspect, tonight compared to last night across parts of South Wales, the South Midlands and southern England. -2, -3, that's towns and cities, whereas further north with more cloud, more breeze, it won't be as frosty here. Will be a little bit grey and damp across the west of Northern Ireland and the Highlands first thing on Tuesday morning. That band of thicker cloud, the odd spot of drizzle, trying to push southwards. For England and Wales, we'll have that fog. Could take a while to clear, certainly likely to stick around through the rush hour. But then it's a dry, fine and sunny day. Perhaps a little cloudier over northern England and thicker cloud across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland from what was that weather front, but it's really fizzling out as it pushes southwards. Maybe the odd spot of drizzle here and there during Tuesday evening across southwest Scotland. Again, we'll see that frost coming back across the south as we head into Wednesday morning. The rest of the week, largely dry, but turning a little cloudier and slowly turning a little milder as well.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh yes, already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this hour, thousands of nurses and ambulance workers walk out in the biggest strike in NHS history. The government accuses unions of putting lives at risk, but one union leader hits back, saying ministers are choosing to punish nurses. We'll have the latest from Westminster and the picket lines. Specialist diving teams have been joining the search for missing dog walker Nicola Bulley, called in by her family after they'd questioned the direction of the police investigation. We'll be live at the scene and hear from the local paper too, the Lancashire Post, on how they're covering the continuing story. Turkey hit by a second huge earthquake, hitting the rescue efforts as workers try to recover people in collapsed buildings. The death toll now in the thousands and expected to rise significantly. We'll have the latest and also talk to a seismologist about what's been going on. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, rather quiet since leaving number 10 until now. She's spoken out to defend her economic plans and says she was never given a realistic chance to implement them. We'll ask our economics editor Liam Halligan, was she right? And of course, you can decide if she was right or wrong. Email us as ever with your thoughts on all the stories we're covering. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll reflect those a little later. First, an update on the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. The UK has joined the international effort to aid Turkey in the aftermath of the devastating earthquake that's killed more than 1,700 people. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says search and rescue specialists as well as rescue equipment would arrive this evening. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. A second powerful quake has struck the same area, causing further damage as rescue teams search through the rubble for survivors.
We do not know how far the number of dead and injured will rise, as debris removal works continue in many buildings in the quake zone. Our hope is that we will recover from this disaster with the least loss of life. We have received several calls for international aid to our country. Offer of assistance from 45 countries, including NATO and the European Union, have reached us.
That was Turkey's president speaking there. Well, thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing are beginning a 2-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Secretary Steve Barkley says a resolution to the strikes needs to come through the independent pay review body.
There's been ongoing pressures on the NHS. Inflation has been higher since last year's pay review body process than was originally forecast, for example, in the spending review 2021. And that's why we've got the evidence in terms of this April that we're working with the trade unions on that will reflect the inflation, reflect those circumstances, but it should be done through the independent pay review body process that can look at both what the NHS needs, but also the wider needs of the economy and the other pressures that many of your viewers are facing.
General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, says the government is punishing nurses.
Nurses deserve and need a decent pay rise. That will boost the economy, not damage the economy, because nurses spend in their local communities. So every NHS worker, including our nurses, deserve a decent pay rise. And here we are in a situation today where this government has chosen to punish the nurses of England instead of getting round a table and talking to me about pay in the same way as they've done in Wales and in Scotland.
Today marks the 16th and final strike day for teachers in Scotland who walked out in a dispute over pay. But more walkouts are on the horizon, as there's been no agreement between the teaching unions and Holyrood. The unions are demanding a 10% rise for their members, but the Scottish Government has only offered a 5% increase. A private underwater rescue company has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company SGI has been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there is still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her 2 children to school. CEO and founder of SGI, Peter Faulding, says they're there to support the police.
Well, we've been tasked by Lancashire Police. We're working closely with them, so we're going to be coming down from the weir and we're going down towards the estuary. There's a fair stretch of river. And we'll be looking at the bottom. I mean, it is deep in places, it's shallow in places. Police, I believe, think that she's in here, and obviously that's where the evidence is actually pointing us at the moment. The police are doing a great job. It's a big task for Lancashire Police to do. This is a particularly long stretch of river to search, and we just bring that backup resource to work closely with them at this instant.
Epsom College has asked for time and space after the death of the school's head and her family. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and her husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating but say they are confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. Former Met police officer David Carrick is due to be sentenced at Southern Crown Court. Carrick admitted to 24 counts of rape, as well as charges of sexual assault, controlling and coercive behaviour and false imprisonment. He carried out the attacks on a dozen women over an 18-year period while serving as a police officer. The 48-year-old will be sentenced tomorrow. The Princess of Wales has urged school children to keep talking about their feelings as she marked the start of Children's Mental Health Week. Catherine joined pupils in London's East End, raising the importance of being open. It's after she launched her Shaping Us campaign last week, which raises the profile of the early years development of children. This is GBNews. That's all from me for now. Now over to Mark.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. So those thousands of nurses and ambulance staff striking today in their ongoing dispute over pay. The first time, indeed, they've walked out together on the same day, described as the biggest strike in the history of the NHS. Royal College of Nursing members staging a 2-day stoppage. Meanwhile, GMB and Unite ambulance crews and call handlers, they'll return to work tomorrow, but then walking out again on Friday. Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barkley, says the government wants to work constructively with the unions, but also stressing it had accepted the recommendations of the independent pay review body. Let's get the picture now on the various picket lines and head down to North Devon District Hospital in Barnstaple. Our southwest of England reporter Jeff Moody down there for us. And Jeff, we were reflecting earlier, of course, the southwest, one of those areas hit particularly by the difficulties in ambulance cover and getting enough nursing staff for the hospitals.
Well, absolutely, and this isn't going to help at all when it comes to recruiting those staff that are so desperately needed. This is the biggest walkout in NHS history. As you said just now, this is the nurses and this is also ambulance drivers too. Well, I'm joined now by Rhys, who's a support worker for the NHS. Rhys, thank you very much for joining me. How difficult a decision was it for you personally to come out on strike today?
Hard, but right. Hard one because I've been in the health sector for 10 years and my role is to look after people, and at the moment the way the NHS is at the moment is harder for us to do that by being in there, but this is the way I can only think I can do at the moment is to get better staffing levels is by coming out and supporting my colleagues that can't strike to do that, because this is what we need to do.
Now, when the teachers go out on strike, that means that children lose a day's education. When the trains are out on strike, it means that people struggle to get to work. When you guys are out on strike, this could have a much more devastating impact on people's lives, couldn't it? There will be people out there today, right now, who are in urgent need of your help but can't get it. How does that sit with you?
Well, I agree and disagree, because the NHS will always be there for people to use at the point of need, and it just means that there'll be less staff to do the role that they need to do. This is why we're out here striking, but we've got colleagues in our hospital behind me that can't strike because they've been derogated. So that means that they've got to provide a minimum safe staffing level, and that service will always be there. The NHS will always be there to use. It just means that it might take a bit longer to get seen, because obviously there's not support workers there to do the essential stuff. But
yes, they're saying here that if you've got an appointment already,
they will be honoured. That appointment will be there. You just need to be expected to wait a little bit longer than normal. So perhaps, if the appointment was for 10 a.m, be there for 10, but it might just mean that you'd be there a little bit longer than normal to be seen.
Now, the Prime Minister is saying, look, it's all very well you guys asking for a pay rise, and thank you for all the work you did during the pandemic, but in this current climate, there just isn't the money available to give you what you want.
Well, there's money there because not mine, I didn't vote for him, but our Health Minister, Steve Barkley, he claimed £170,000 last year in expenses as an MP, and to my hospital alone, that's equivalent to 4 full-time trained nurses just in my hospital. So times that across the UK, that's where the money's coming from.
Okay, Rhys, thank you very much. It's only fair to say that the MP's expenses are there to maintain their office, staff, etc., etc. It's a separate thing from paying workers, but the point still stands, and the strike will continue tomorrow as well.
And ambulance workers then on Friday as well, as we were saying. Jeff, for the moment, thank you for updating us there in Barnstaple. Point being made there about Steve Barkley, where the Health Secretary has been asked about the strikes during his visit to Kingston Hospital earlier. This is what he had to say.
Well, we have been discussing this coming year from April's pay with the unions. We have the process through the pay review body. It's an independent process, and we're keen to get the evidence to that reflects the pressure that the NHS has been under and the wider context in terms of inflation. I don't think it's right to go back to last year, to last April, retrospectively. We should be looking forward to the pay review body that is taking evidence now and working constructively with the trade unions in terms of ensuring that the evidence that goes to the pay review body reflects the wider pressure that the NHS has been under.
But we're not talking about going backwards, we're talking about dealing with pay this financial year. We're still in this financial year at a time in which inflation is still in double digits.
Well, we've accepted in full the pay review body recommendations for this year, and of course that came on top of the 3% that was awarded the previous year to the NHS when other public sector workers had a pay freeze. And the pay review body looked at the evidence around inflation, the wider context, what was affordable, the issues with recruitment and retention as part of setting the pay last year. But it's right to recognise that there's been ongoing pressures on the NHS. Inflation has been higher since last year's pay review body process than was originally forecast, for example, in the spending review 2021. And that's why we've got the evidence in terms of this April that we're working with the trade unions on that will reflect the inflation, reflect those circumstances, but it should be done through the independent pay review body process that can look at both what the NHS needs, but also the wider needs of the economy and the other pressures that many of your viewers are facing.
Health Minister speaking a little earlier. Joining us now in the studio, our political reporter Olivia Utley. And Olivia, of course, Saffron Caudry, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Providers, had been urging the government to try to negotiate on this current year, 22 to 23, even if it was, for instance, a one-off deal, so that it wouldn't be tied into future increases. But Health Secretary not having any truck with that.
Yes, and what's quite interesting about that is Steve Barkley appears to have rowed back on his position from a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, it was suggested that he was pushing to backdate the pay rise, as you say, perhaps in the form of a one-off payment, and he was trying to persuade the Treasury to do that. But it seems now that the Treasury has put its foot down, so to speak, and Steve Barkley is now holding quite a firm line here. The calculation perhaps is that the support for the strikes, both from the perspective of the public and from the perspective of the strikers themselves, might be slowly ebbing away. But if that is the government's calculation, there's not a huge amount of evidence behind it. It is true to say that support for the strikes in other areas of the public sector, namely civil servants and train drivers, is diminishing. And especially in terms of the train drivers, some of them have now been on strike for so long, they've lost so much pay, they don't really want to strike anymore. But support for the NHS strikes, both from the workers' perspective and the public perspective, is very high indeed.
And a particularly bitter, I don't know if that's the right word, relationship between the RCN, Pat Cullen, and Steve Barkley. It seems that, you know, it's broken down in terms of any kind of coming together.
Yeah, this is certainly an issue because we are seeing, Maria Caulfield suggested that a deal hasn't yet been reached in Wales between the RCN and the Labour government, but it looks like we're well on the way there. And in Scotland, the RCN has just agreed to call off its strikes. Interestingly, in Scotland, they're not backdating that pay rise.
No.
So all the English UK government is asking for is a deal similar to what has been agreed in Scotland. So, as you say, it could be that that sour relationship between Steve Barkley and Pat Cullen is getting in the way of a deal being reached.
Yeah, and we've got the ambulance workers as well, Unite and GMB. It looks, again, as if there might be a deal with the ambulance drivers in Wales. 4.5% and an extra 3% to top up. Now, again, that's difficult for the government in that clearly the Labour-devolved administration have come to some kind of agreement with that particular union.
Yes, exactly. And it's difficult for the government specifically because ambulance workers are one of few public sector workers who have actually seen a real terms pay increase in the last decade. Of course, if you bring in the pay rise that the government is suggesting, then it would be actually a real terms decrease after inflation. But they are essentially doing better than other public sector workers. So the government is worried that if it does reach some agreement with ambulance workers, then it really opens a can of worms for agreeing similar deals across other public sector areas where pay has actually been much lower than ambulance workers.
Prime Minister's official spokesman was asked, what is Rishi Sunak's plan for ending the strikes? Answer, we want to keep discussing how we can find a path forward with the unions. Because the unions keep saying, well, they keep saying the door is open, but substantive discussions just aren't taking place. No negotiations.
No, well, and Rishi Sunak has ruled out intervening himself in pay negotiations, understandably, because, of course, it would step on the toes of his ministers who have been delegated to do this. But, you know, Keir Starmer is saying he would get round the table. There's no substance to what he would do either. So it just looks as though we're at this real impasse now where the government... So it's very hard to say how this is going to progress, but the government is holding firm to its line that any sort of pay rises would open the door for pay rises across the public sector, which would be inflationary. So if Rishi Sunak wants to hold to his whole mandate is essentially built on the premise that public spending must remain low, public taxes high, keep inflation down, keep the debt low. It's going to be a very tough job for him to hold true to that while these strikes carry on raging.
Yeah, especially with Liz Truss obviously noises off about the economy and how you do things. Anyway, that's another topic. But Olivia, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll update you with the situation on the picket lines. But let's tell you now about the private specialist team of divers that's been brought in today to help the search for missing mum Nicola Bulley. They're in the waterways of the Wyre River near St Michael's on Wyre. Police working on the theory that the 45-year-old had fallen into the water, but her family and friends questioning that assertion, saying there was still no evidence. Well, the head of this private diving team saying he's confident they will find Nicola if she has fallen into that river. Joining us now is Nicola Adam, editor of the Lancashire Post, that's been following this story. And Lancashire, clearly a difficult issue for everyone in Lancashire reading this, bearing in mind the family waiting for news, and the fact that it's the family itself that seems to have triggered this latest search.
Yes, certainly Nicola's family do seem to be driving the narrative a little bit, having got a little bit frustrated with the police sticking to the line that Nicola must have fallen in the river. I mean, they're accepting that that is one of the scenarios, but they appear to be feeling that more needs to be done. More action needs to be taken. And today's agreement that they're bringing in this private specialist firm to come and put sonar through in the river and check once and for all to make sure she's not in there, certainly in this section, I think is positive action. The family needed some more action. Just waiting for sort of witnesses to come forward and that sort of thing had sort of trickled to a stop. So this is very important for the family to feel that something is happening.
Yeah. Can I ask, this is a difficult question, I know, but you will obviously be close to the ground. Has there been a lack of confidence in the local community, and particularly the family, at the way this inquiry has been handled?
I don't know if there's been a lack of confidence. I think frustrations are starting to come out now, sort of 10 days in. There's certainly frustration from certain elements, and it's been very difficult to kind of, you know, you've got the family, you've got what they're saying and their friends, you've got the local community doing the searching, and then you have wild and sometimes, you know, unfair speculation that is going on across social media. And the world's media has descended on this small rural village, and everybody has an opinion on it, and that's become very difficult. So that kind of managing that is proving very difficult. There's a fine line between keeping it in the public eye and everybody coming up with their own theories, some of which are, you know, not wildly, you know, probably not accurate, but at the same time keeping an open mind about what's happened. But yeah, I mean, it is getting to that point in the investigation. It feels like decisive action needs to be taken by the police. There needs to be further evidence of that, inquiries and actions. Otherwise, there is going to be questions coming along the line, I do think.
Yeah, and you're touching on the fact that the world and his wife has descended there, and I gather there are people, clairvoyants and all sorts of people with their own theories. I mean, it must be very difficult and even frustrating, not just for the family, but the local community there.
Yeah, I actually did go down myself yesterday to the banks of the River Wyre to film something, and it was a Sunday, and normally a Sunday is probably the prime time for people walking, but it was positively busy with people, mainly with dogs. There's a lot of local residents who were with dogs and with their maps that they've been given, because they're very organised in the local community. They're trying to make sure every single little inch of ground is covered, and they've been doing that incredibly well. But then there's a lot of people down there walking who I'm sure would probably not normally be. Then you've got the addition of, the press, myself included, are down there too. The police presence is actually very light, yesterday. Obviously, it will be more today because you've got this specialist unit in, and there's no police tape or anything at the scene. It's a very idyllic, beautiful spot, but just with high traffic of people at the moment. There's a real tension in the air. Everyone's being very kind to each other, but there's a real tension in the air at the moment.
And given that, how do you take the story forward? Because, of course, you've got particular sensitivities as being the local paper there.
Yeah, I think we're trying desperately to just stick to the facts, to what we know, to what the family want us to know, want us to say, and to try and avoid that dangerous area of speculation, because that's not going to help anybody. And certainly the local community, they're doing their best, and you can already feel that there is a little bit of tension in the air when you're in St Michael's itself, because everybody's so desperately worried. They're really trying really hard, and there's a bit of, obviously for obvious reasons, having all these people and press from across the country, across the world descend upon you is very frustrating, particularly when nothing appears to be happening. So I'm hoping that this action today will lead, if they don't find Nicola, it'll allow them to say, right, okay.
Yeah.
Where is she then? We need to look at some other lines of inquiry very quickly.
Yeah, close one line of questioning so another can open, indeed. Well, Nicola, thank you very much for joining us once more, editor of the Lancashire Post. And, of course, we'll keep monitoring what's happening today with that search still going on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, the latest on the earthquakes, 2 at least so far hitting Turkey and Syria this morning as the rescue efforts continue. And we're learning now that Britain is to send 76 search and rescue specialists. That coming through. We'll update you on that, but let's take a quick break first.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you now on the situation in both Turkey and Syria, where these 2 large earthquakes have hit many areas. The first measured 7.8 The second, which struck only a few hours ago, measured 7.5 and fairly shallow as well, so near the surface. So that's affected many buildings. We're just being told the death toll now nearing 1,900 and expected to rise because, of course, the second quake hit while a lot of rescue teams were trying to get to people in collapsed buildings. Local TV reports are showing the effects at street level and indeed the people surviving in the smoke and the dust as many of these high-rise buildings just pancaked. Well, we're now being told the UK government sending 76 search and rescue specialists, equipment and 4 search dogs, that coming through from Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, expected to arrive this evening. Additionally, the UK talking to the UN about emergency humanitarian support for those affected further south in Syria, of course, already hit by war. And indeed, it's very, very cold down there, snow as well. So clearly without water or heat, very difficult conditions for the survivors as well. Well, let's speak now to David Whitehouse, an earthquake expert, seismologist, joining us. David, just looking at, first of all, at the measurements, 7.8, then 7.5, and indeed the fact that these seem quite shallow, very near the surface. This would explain a lot of the damage to these high-rise buildings.
These are monster earthquakes. The 7.8 is probably the strongest earthquake ever to strike Turkey. There was a 7.8 in 1939, but this seems to be worse than that. A 7.5 is still a monster. On its own, it would cause massive destruction. These are, as you say, are shallow earthquakes, and that means a lot of the energy doesn't go down into the earth, it goes up. These are strike-slip earthquakes, they're so-called, because they're a result of a build-up of tension in the tectonic plates, which are pushing against each other in this very active region. And the tension and the pressure builds up, and then it suddenly cracks, it suddenly slips and releases all this energy, fairly shallow, gets to the surface, makes a complete mess of what's above it. I mean, this is absolutely terrible, because not only are these earthquakes powerful, but as you said, the second one occurred a few hours after the first one, which occurred at the worst possible time in the middle of the night. The buildings which didn't come down, which have been damaged and made unsafe, would come down with the second earthquake, along with ruptured water mains, ruptured gas supplies, ruptured pipelines, ruptured electricity supplies, which is often isn't very easy to switch off. So this is a major natural catastrophe, the like of which few nations have ever seen.
Yeah, and the latest report suggests that tremors were felt as far away as Greenland. I mean, obviously the fault line and the, as you say, the tectonic plates are known about, but was there any forewarning in terms of activity starting to build up on the various monitoring devices?
Well, yes, these earthquakes can be detected all around the world. Our earthquake detection facilities are very sensitive, but on the ground, this was felt hundreds of miles away. And yes, Turkey is a tectonic hotspot, an earthquake hotspot. It frequently has earthquakes. It lost 10,000 lives, I think, in 1999 in the Izmit earthquake. So they are experienced, they are well aware of the problem they face. But the problem with precursors is that you have frequent earthquakes, and it's not possible to see if they're leading to something. Right. Until you get the big one, and then you look back and you say, oh, that was the case. The prediction of earthquakes is not possible at the moment. You just have to be well prepared. And the Turks are well prepared for this. They have an efficient, well-organized system. But as you can see from the pictures there, when the system faces something like that, they need all the help they can get.
Yeah, and it does appear that, some buildings have survived and others literally have just pancaked. Many of these concrete buildings, so huge slabs of flooring and walls going down, trapping people. I mean, presumably they've got some kind of standard they have to be built to in a known earthquake area, or is it literally that perhaps some areas have just had more shaking going on the surface?
Well, yes, the earthquake will have local effects, although it's spread out over wide areas. Some regions will actually be worse than others due to local geological conditions. But having said that, although there are governmental diktats as to how you build buildings and regulation standards. First of all, not everybody applies to those. And secondly, the standards have changed over the years. So older buildings are not as safe as modern buildings. And if, as we've seen in some pictures of flats coming down, it's the older building which brings the newer building standing next door down with it. So it is a complete mess. But with an earthquake of 7.6 and 7.5 or 7.8, it's hard to convey. These are monster earthquakes. There are few cities in the world which would survive, which would not be very severely damaged by an earthquake of this magnitude.
Yeah, with the best design and the best will indeed. David, thank you very much indeed for your view. Thanks for joining us on GB News. Thanks very much indeed. And of course, we'll continue to update you. As we say, 1,900, the latest official death toll, expected to go even higher. Coming up, we'll have the latest from Epsom with this awful tragedy. The head teacher, her husband and 7-year-old daughter all being found dead. Paul Hawkins will be there for us, our national reporter. First, an update on the other headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 2:32. The UK has joined the international effort to aid Turkey in the aftermath of a devastating earthquake that's killed almost 2,000 people. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says search and rescue specialists as well as rescue equipment would arrive this evening. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck an area near the border with Syria, leaving thousands more injured and causing widespread destruction in both countries. A second powerful quake has struck the same area, causing further damage as rescue teams search the rubble for survivors. Thousands of nurses and ambulance staff in England and some in Wales are striking in what's being described as the largest walkout in the history of the NHS. The Royal College of Nursing is beginning a 2-day strike in a dispute over pay. Ambulance crews and call handlers will return to work tomorrow, but will continue industrial action on Friday. Health Secretary Steve Barkley says a resolution to the strikes needs to come through the independent pay review body.
There's been ongoing pressures on the NHS. Inflation has been higher since last year's pay review body process than was originally forecast, for example, in the spending review 2021. And that's why we've got the evidence in terms of this April that we're working with the trade unions on that will reflect the inflation, reflect those circumstances, but it should be done through the independent pay review body process that can look at both what the NHS needs, but also the wider needs of the economy and the other pressures that many of your viewers are facing.
Has begun their search for Nicola Bulley. The specialist diving company SGI has been brought in to assist police in searching the River Wyre after Miss Bulley vanished over a week ago. Police believe the 45-year-old fell in the river, but her family and friends have questioned that, saying there's still no evidence. It's after new CCTV pictures were released from the day she disappeared, which show the mother of two loading her car before driving her 2 children to school. Epsom College has asked for time and space after the school's head and her family were found dead. The bodies of Emma Pattinson, her daughter Letty and her husband George were found at the prestigious boarding school in the early hours of Sunday morning. Surrey police are investigating but say they're confident it's an isolated incident with no third-party involvement. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you now on this terrible tragedy with the head of the private school Epsom College being found dead alongside her husband and 7-year-old daughter. Police say the bodies of Emma Pattinson, her husband George and daughter Letty were all found at the private boarding school in the early hours of yesterday morning. Well, Surrey police say they're confident the tragedy is an isolated incident, as they said, and that there was no third-party involvement. Let's get more now with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's there at the college. And Paul, clearly a lot of police activity still going on. We can see the barrier there behind you. And reports they've been searching the indoor rifle range, which I think is part of the college.
Yeah, that's a report published by The Telegraph, who are quoting one man. The police so far aren't commenting on that, so it is a little bit speculative. The rifle range is next to the property where the family were found, so it could just be standard operating procedure by the police. So in terms of what we can definitely say has been happening this afternoon and throughout the day, this is a 72-acre independent college. There are 850 pupils here. 60% of them are day pupils, but 40% are boarders. We've seen pupils milling around inside, dressed in uniform throughout the day. It's a big site, as I say. There are various entrances dotted around the perimeter. They've been staffed by security guards wearing high-vis jackets, and then the police have been making their way in and out of not just this entrance, but other entrances as they carry out their investigation. We know that forensic officers have been on site during the day as part of the investigation. This is Emma Pattinson, 45 years old. She's only been the head teacher, the first female head of this school, for 5 months, during which time the school was named the Independent School of the Year. Before that, she spent 6 years at Croydon High School. Tributes have been pouring in for her husband George, and their 7-year-old daughter Letty. The school the chair of the Board of Governors, Dr. Alistair Wells, calling her a wonderful teacher, but most of all a delightful person who enriched the lives of many pupils and colleagues throughout her distinguished career. Her previous school, Croydon High School, described her as hugely respected and much loved, calling her warm, energetic, compassionate, generous and an insightful colleague and friends. So the tributes continue to pour in. The police investigation is ongoing, and in terms of the staff and the pupils' welfare, the school has brought in counsellors to help deal with trying to process what has happened. Specially trained officers have been brought in, and the flags, all the flags bearing the school colours, flying above the school at half-mast.
Yeah, as you were saying, with a boarding school, clearly they just can't shut the place down, but a big job to do now to try and help all those pupils after such a traumatic event, and clearly the police investigation continue. But Paul, for the moment, thanks for updating us. Back to you, of course, as we get more. Now, Southwark Court has heard how a Metropolitan Police officer, David Carrick, sent one of his victims a photograph of himself with his work-issue gun, saying, "Remember, I am the boss." His sentencing underway at the court. The 48-year-old also using his police baton and handcuffs during attacks on more than a dozen women over 17 years, the hearing being told. He's admitted 24 counts of rape, as well as charges of sexual assault, controlling and coercive behaviour and false imprisonment. Let's get more with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's been following proceedings at Southwark Crown Court for us. And Mark, it's a pretty desperate catalogue of humiliation and attacks on these women, including someone who's a serving Metropolitan Police officer.
Yes, and he absolutely used his status as a serving Metropolitan Police officer throughout many of the offences he committed to coerce, to intimidate and threaten his victims with the consequences if they dared say anything about the crimes that he had committed. For almost 20 years, he went on raping and attacking multiple women, a dozen victims over that period. He'd come to the notice of the Metropolitan Police on 9 separate occasions because of complaints that were made against him, but they were either not followed through properly, or they came to the conclusion that there was no case to answer in the allegations that were made against him. Regardless, this individual went on continued to serve until his arrest in 2021, and of course now has admitted to almost 50 separate offences, including 24 counts of rape. Some of those counts of rape involved multiple rape offences, an absolutely horrific ordeal that his victims suffered. We are now on to victim impact statements here at Southwark Crown Court. We've been hearing from victim number one, his first victim in July of 2003, a young woman who was in a bar, had met him, had agreed to go home with him. He had said by way of persuasion to her that, look, don't worry, you couldn't be in safer hands. I'm a serving police officer. Nothing could be further from the truth, of course, when this woman did return to his house, decided she didn't want anything more to do with him, tried to leave. He attacked her, raped her multiple times. At one point, managed to get hold of a gun that was somewhere around his bed and held it up against this woman's head, a black handgun, it was described. In her victim impact statement, the woman said, "I honestly thought he was going to kill me that night." She said, "I kept seeing the gun. He pointed it at my head." And she's gone on as well to say that he has ruined relationships in my life. We heard from another victim who also described how he ruined relationships in her life and that she turned to drink after her ordeal. Another of the victims described feelings of guilt. She said, "I felt like it was my fault that I put myself in that position." And of course, anyone who knows about the way in which predatory sexual offenders like David Carrick operate, they will often use coercive and bullying and intimidating behaviour to make their victims feel like they are somehow responsible. But of course, the only man responsible is this former, now serving Metropolitan Police officer, who we're hearing the victim impact statements about the harm that he caused to these 12 victims, and then tomorrow he'll face justice, will be jailed here at Southwark Crown Court.
Now, clearly, because of the charges and rape being involved, the victims can't be identified. So the witness statements and the impact statements read out by Tom Little, Casey, who's doing the prosecution, and certainly he's indicating to the court about the humiliation that this man was meting out to everyone. I mean, one report of his victim being shut in a small cupboard and then whistled at her as if she was a dog.
Yeah, multiple counts of really quite humiliating and aggressive behaviour that absolutely crossed over into some serious assaults. He was physically assaulting his victims, as well as, of course, putting them through a terrifying ordeal, tying them up, locking them in a cupboard under the stairs, whipping them, all kinds of awful behaviour that has, as we've been hearing in these victim impact statements, a lasting effect on all of those victims to the point where it really has ruined their lives, impacted greatly on the way in which they have tried to move forward, and in some cases really been unable to move forward in any meaningful way. They're still feeling the results and the impact of what this man did to them all those years ago.
And we'll see how justice will be served tomorrow, of course, with the sentencing on that day at Southwark. Mark, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to some more edifying matters now, with a video being released of the Princess of Wales joining primary school children for an arts and crafts event. But an important message too behind that film. Her Royal Highness supporting Children's Mental Health Week. This year's theme is Let's Connect. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker has more for us.
Keep talking about your feelings and keep asking others how they're doing and helping them to talk about their feelings as well.
The Princess of Wales, using her status to break stigmas at the start of Children's Mental Health Week. Catherine's been patron of charity Place to Be for almost a decade. Improving emotional well-being of young children is something our future Queen has long been passionate about.
I'm delighted to be supporting Children's Mental Health Week yet again, and it's lovely to be here at St John's Primary School. It's been wonderful to speak to so many children here about the importance of connections and the important people in their lives too.
The princess built paper chains with the children, perhaps symbolising building connections with friends and family. That's because this year's theme is Let's Connect.
The aim is to build awareness and understanding of children and young people's mental health. All week, schools, families, youth groups will be getting involved and taking part. People thrive in communities, and when we have really good, positive connections with others, that's really, really good for our emotional health and well-being.
Nearly 78% of young people supported by Place to Be last year felt socially anxious. But with support, new data shows 2/3 of those with severe difficulties saw an improvement in their mental health.
I take deep breaths in and I drink a glass of water.
Last week, Her Royal Highness launched her legacy campaign, Shaping Us, which aims to raise awareness that the first 5 years of a child's life has a huge impact on their futures.
I'm a firm believer in giving children the skills that they need for life and focusing on their social and emotional development.
It's unclear what impacts the campaign will have on the under-5s and whether it will have any effect on life outcomes. But what is clear is the Princess of Wales intends this to be her lifelong project. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Now, let's reflect on, recent history. Liz Truss speaking out for the first time since resigning as Prime Minister. That 4,000-word essay in The Telegraph explaining she was never given a realistic chance, she said, to start her tax-cutting agenda, and instead was taken down by what she was the left-wing economic establishment. However, she did acknowledge that she was not blameless when that mini-budget unravelled. Well, joining us now, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. And, of course, Liam, the judgment was she wasn't on the money, nor was Kwasi Kwarteng. It all sort of fell apart pretty quickly. But a bit of revisionism going on now?
This isn't ancient history. It was only in September, Mark. A lot's happened since then. But this is now feeding in actively into an increasingly tumultuous debate among Conservative backbenchers and ministers as the spring statement approaches, the budget, for all intents and purposes, on March the 15th. Let's have a look at that front page on The Telegraph. Let's just say that my newspaper went big on Truss. It was her first proper intervention since she stood down as Prime Minister, bundled out the door. The Telegraph ran a 4,000-word essay over 2 pages. You know, my newspaper column every week is about 1,000 words.
You should be so lucky.
Yeah, and it's, you know, that's how long this essay was. And in it, she did show some contrition. She said she could have moved a bit less quickly, but she was absolutely adamant that the policies she put forward, low taxation, were absolutely right. And she said that a lot of the reason the markets went haywire was because of lax regulation of pension funds and the fact that the Bank of England had raised interest rates by less than expected just a few days before the mini-budget.
And perhaps timing and also the way that it was presented and communication skills. However, we also remember that part of the sort of equation, if you like, was the OBR forecast and the charge that the government hadn't involved them in all the sort of number crunching.
It was absolutely a mistake. I mean, I saw Liz Truss before this weekend as she was just finishing the essay, and It's absolutely the case. I think she acknowledges that she should have involved the OBR more in the run-up to the mini budget. It was a very strange time. Her Majesty the Queen had just died. The country was still, as it still is, rattled by lockdown. The economy was feeling very, very febrile, if you like. But the point she makes in this essay, Mark, and this is not a point in isolation. A lot of people think this, that Whitehall forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility for the Treasury are unnecessarily gloomy, and their forecasts become destiny because politicians have to make decisions. They're forced to make decisions based on these forecasts, and the forecasts often turn out to be wildly out of kilter. Let's just have a look at a graphic that I've got here, and I'll keep GB News radio viewers informed. So this is a graphic that I put together. On the left there, you see these black bars. These are the forecasts that the OBR made in March 2021, OK? And the blue bars are the actual outcome. And I'll just read out the numbers for radio viewers as well as TV viewers. In March 2021, the OBR forecast that income tax and national insurance would raise £128 billion. It turned out to be £142 billion.
So we did better than expected.
That's an 11% miss. Corporation tax, the OBR, in March 2021 said 39.5, £40 billion for corporation tax. It turned out, Mark, to be 62.6 billion. They're making a forecast in March for the April that follows. I mean, immediate forecasting. This is not long-range forecasting. That's a 58% miss. And here's the big one.
The third one, yeah.
The third one, on the right there of the screen for TV viewers, the OBR said in March 2021 the government would borrow £234 billion. It turned out to be £125 billion. In other words, the borrowing prognosis that the OBR put forward was £108 billion out. It was wildly over gloomy.
And that's what frightened the horses, and that's what did for Kwasi Kwarteng. In that, was she right to hang him out to dry on this and make him take the blame effectively?
I think in the end, that isn't, with all respect, Mark, that's process, that's political theatre. That's between her and Kwasi Kwarteng. And by the way, she was extremely warm.
Well, they were said to be in lockstep, weren't they?
They are absolute political soulmates. They came in at the same time. They think in a very similar way about the economy. She was very praiseworthy of Kwasi Kwarteng when I saw her before this essay was released, and indeed in that essay. The important point, Mark, is can a Conservative Party enact a policy of low taxation, or is it hamstrung by Whitehall? That is the point.
And very quickly, in that point, the big thing now, corporation tax, and whether Sunak will have to acknowledge not to push that higher.
This is a brewing row ahead of March the 15th. The government is nailed on to raise corporation tax. It's been legislated for in April from 19 to 25%, right? A lot of people on the Tory backbenches are now saying, keep it at 19. Firms can't take, small firms in particular, sky-high energy bills, supply chain costs, falling demand, and now this corporation tax bill. A lot of people are saying, reputable people, economists and politicians, if you increase the rate of corporation tax, you'll end up getting less money. And that the OBR forecasts on this, as they were last year, as I've just demonstrated, are too gloomy. That is the argument.
I feel a 4,000-word essay brewing, or less. Anyway, thank you for that. And, of course, we'll see what emerges as March the 15th approaches. That's it from us for the moment. Patrick with you in a moment. But before that, let's update you on the weather. We're back tomorrow.
Good afternoon. Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Fine and sunny for many today. Certainly, of course, most of England and Wales. Some sunshine, of course, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Quite a bit of cloud here, but for the vast majority, it's dry, thanks to this large area of high pressure, showing signs of just ebbing away to the east, which is allowing this weather front to move down from the northwest. So increasing cloud across western Scotland, the breeze picking up, and overnight there will be some rain creeping in initially to the Western Isles. Elsewhere, though, it stays dry. For England and Wales, it's all about the frost and the fog, turning cold quickly once the sun has set, and then the fog thickening up parts of the Midlands, southern England, South Wales. Could be quite dense for tomorrow morning's rush hour. It'll be cold as well, -2, -3, that's towns and cities, maybe -6 in some rural spots. +5 or 6 further north, though, a mild night for Scotland and Northern Ireland thanks to that blanket of cloud, making for a grey start in the morning. A little bit of rain across western Scotland, the west of Northern Ireland, but it's kind of fizzling out as it pushes southwards. Most of England and Wales again dry, probably a cloudier day for parts of northern England, but plenty of sunshine in the south once that fog has cleared, which may take most of the morning. 7 or 8 Celsius here. Further north could get 9 or 10, so actually slightly above average. In the afternoon, looking sunnier in the far northwest. As we go through the evening, that cloud will stick around across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps pushing into northern England. Again, the odd spot of rain. Again, further south, frost and fog patches thickening up through the early hours of Wednesday morning, which on Wednesday morning, again, may take a while to clear. So it's a cold start, potentially a foggy start, but then generally a sunny day. Another band of rain then on Wednesday coming into the northwest later, and the winds really pick up. That's why we have a Met Office yellow warning. Those winds could cause some problems in the far northwest during Wednesday. Temperature-wise, again, single figures for most, about average for the time of year.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely Right. stunned.